Honourable members, before we get into matter of privilege and recognition of guests, yesterday the Honourable Leader of the Opposition rose on a point of order and sought clarification on my announcement that Bill number 100 will be committed to the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management. I will draw members' attention to Section 46(2) of the new Legislative Assembly Act, which passed in the House during the fall sitting, which states, any bill related to the Legislative Assembly or the administrative of its office should be committed to the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management for consideration and may be brought before the Legislative Assembly in accordance with the procedures for public bills in the rules of the Legislative Assembly. The reference to its office includes all independent offices that fall under the responsibility of the Legislative Assembly, including Elections PEI, as Bill number 100 amends section of the Election Act. This bill is required to follow the procedures as outlined in Section 46(2). Most bills that are introduced in the House do not have a requirement to be committed to the Standing Committee of the House at this time. The only bills that should be referred to the committee pursuant to the rules of the Legislative Assembly are private bills to the Standing Committee on Rules, Regulations. Private bills and privileges after first reading. All other bills introduced in the House may be referred to a standing committee, but that process requires a motion with proper notice. Pursuant to Rule 49G, which outlines the referral of any matter to committee. As the current Act states, bills related to the Legislative Assembly or its office shall be committed. It is my view that any bill introduced that relates to the Legislative Assembly and its office are automatically committed to the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management. In keeping with the House official practice for private bills as outlined in the rules, bills would be automatically committed to the committee following its first reading. Honourable members, this is a new process since this is first time a bill affecting the Legislative Assembly has been introduced since the new Legislative Assembly Act was passed by the House last fall. And I appreciate the honourable member allowing me this time to outline the procedures relating to the bill that relate to the Legislative Assembly office. Thank you. That's a lot of reading. Matter of privilege and recognition of guest, the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for your wise ruling and the clarification around that. That's very helpful to all of us going forward. So, thank you very much for your leadership, and welcome back to all of my colleagues for another day of debate in the legislature. All of those who are watching at home, and in particular some of our media who aren't actually in the building because of the 72-hour red zone we find ourselves in. Hi to those as well. I want to begin my remarks, Mr. Speaker, just by I heard a lot of positive comments yesterday from the recognition that the Leader of the Opposition gave to the late Darrell Guignon. It was a touching and poignant tribute, and I wanted to just point out that our words in here matter, and they have impact outside of this chamber, and certainly that was a very positive comment that is playing very well in the public. So thank you for that, and to Darrell's family, we pass along our condolences as well. Most in here, Mr. Speaker, know that I'm a huge hockey fan. It was an exciting day yesterday for Prince Edward Island hockey and those connected to it. First of all, our goaltender with the Charlottetown Islanders, Colton Ellis, who is from Cape Breton, signed a 3-year entry-level contract in the NHL with the St. Louis Blues, Mr. Speaker. I've been watching Colton for a long time. He was the goaltender when his team from Cape Breton won the TELUS Cup Midget Championship, Mr. Speaker, in what is probably the biggest upset in recent hockey history, for sure, and Colton was the leader of that. And also our very own Josh Curry, Mr. Speaker, played last night with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I watched the last half of the game when I got home. Josh played almost 10 minutes of hockey, played great as he always does. So good for Josh, who has shown what a tremendous player he is and what perseverance he has, Mr. Speaker, to make his way back to the NHL again, and I sure hope he sticks there. Mr. Speaker, I want to also encourage all Islanders, and particularly those members in this Legislative Assembly, to continue to get out and support our local restaurants, Mr. Speaker. They have been hit hard through COVID since the very beginning. They've been very innovative and very creative. You drive around Charlottetown in particular, there's domes set up for outside dining. They're trying to do every possible thing they can. And I know it's been brought up in this legislature before, but let's remember to shop local to every extent we can and to support those in the restaurant and hospitality industry, because they do employ thousands of Islanders, Mr. Speaker, and they do a wonderful job. To the team of Eddie McKenzie, Tyler Smith, Sean Ledgerwood, Ryan Lowry, who are in the Calgary bubble awaiting the start of the National Brier in Calgary, wish them well, as well as their alternate Aaron Bantling, Mr. Speaker. Big commitment for our curlers this year, as we just seen with the Suzanne Burt rink. Not only do they need to isolate on the way out, they have to isolate while they're in Calgary, and they have to isolate when they're home. It's a huge commitment, Mr. Speaker. But they have shown to represent our province very well, and we wish Eddie the best of luck in the Brier. And finally, Mr. Speaker, it was raised yesterday by the Leader of the Opposition, the fact that the ECMA nominations were out, and many Islanders were recognized for their tremendous talent. Among those, Lenny Gallant, Rose Cousins, the East Pointers, Rachel Beck-Kinley, and so many others. Never has it been more important for us to celebrate our culture through art, story, and song, Mr. Speaker, and it's just wonderful that these great entertainers in PEI are continuing to do amazing work, and they continue to be able to do it from here, Mr. Speaker. So congratulations to all of those, and the best of luck in the proceedings today for all of my colleagues.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to start by recognising the good news that came this morning, earlier today, from Dr. Heather Morrison, that the real concerns that we've had across this island for the last couple of days. There was, I think, a collective sigh of relief from tip to tip across the province when she started to speak earlier today, and in the Premier as well. So I'm really glad that we're moving back to, of course, a still restricted situation, in that the circuit breaker will still be in effect. But the fact that we can go back to the, out of that sense of real anxiety that I think all Islanders have been feeling for the last 48 hours. So that was wonderful news. And again, I want to thank everybody who's been involved in the testing. 11,000 people since Saturday. That's just a Herculean task. And to have done that with the resources we have is just quite spectacular. So thank you to everybody. Last night was cold night, Mr. Speaker, and it was a great night to have one of the Acadian memorial blankets that are being produced by McCausland Woolen Mills. This is being done as a fundraiser for the Farmers Bank of Rustico and the Doucette House Museum up there. And they've sold out, which is wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful because in this year, as the Premier said, and business is struggling, places like the Farmers Bank and Doucette Museum have seen a real decrease in the number of people coming through. So this is a really important fundraiser for them. Not only that, but it's supporting a great island rural business here, producing fantastic product, and I'm sure many of us in this house have McCausland blankets in our homes. So I wanted to pass on my congratulations to Arnold Smith and the rest of the people up there in Rustico who conceived this idea. And the blankets are beautiful too, blue and red and gold stripes that obviously are there to represent the Acadian flag. And thank you to McCausland for coming forward with the design. And it's just a great fundraiser. And if you haven't got one already, you may have to wait, but I would suggest you put your name in and try and get one. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a privilege to be back in the legislature working on behalf of Islanders today. I would like to take an opportunity to say hello to the great constituents of Evangeline Muscush who may be tuned in today. And if they are, thank them for joining us, and I hope they enjoy the proceedings. After a few days of nerve-wracking developments on the COVID-19 front, it appears the situation may be leveling out. We see the new case numbers decreasing daily, and public health has managed to establish connections between recent positive cases, decreasing fears of potential widespread community transmission. We also heard renewed optimism on the vaccine front yesterday, with news that every Islander over the age of 16 should have their first vaccine dose by the end of June. These are wonderful developments in our province, and we cannot thank everyone involved enough for getting us to where we are today. While the COVID-19 continues to be the backdrop of everything we do, Islanders have once again shown the rest of the country how much we can accomplish when we work together for the common good. With that, I would just like to thank all Islanders, from those who got tested to those who administered the tests, and the many more people who have worked tirelessly this past year to combat COVID-19 in our province. And Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to thank the staff here today, and I hope I can mention his name, Stuart, who goes around and does all the sanitizing to make things safe in here every 15 or 20 minutes for us. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to rise and welcome everyone watching from District 18 Rustico Emerald. And first off, I just wanted to apologize for my uninformed comments on Motion 18 in appreciation of Island youth and their contributions to keeping our community safe, which of course I support. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to recognize Arnold Smith and the great work he's done with the Farmers Bank of Rustico over many years. And especially that excellent project with McCausland, the woolen blankets for Acadian, and I too hope that they stock up, and so I can get mine. And of course, this month of March is Les Rendezvous de la Francophonie, and so there's some great events out there. I'd encourage everybody to look into that and take advantage of it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness, third party whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to recognize a few things that happened in the last day or so. Especially wanted to give a big thank you to the snowplow operators in the province. For many, it was a rather interesting drive home last night. The leader of the third party and myself tried to convoy home, and we decided to go the Trans-Canada instead of Route 2, which I think was a very wise decision, actually, Mr. Speaker. But when you drive in conditions like that and you actually see the difference that a well-designed road that's built up, the snow was really, there was no snow on the road. It just kept blowing right off. Now, there were some issues in a few locations on visibility, but I do thank the snowplow operators, but also the engineers that design good, safe highways in this province, Mr. Speaker. And when I was filling up with gas on the way down this morning, one of the snowplow operators, a fellow named Winston Bishop, and Winston's grandfather was actually an MLA in the legislature, and I was asking him what the roads were like, and he said it actually was pretty good all night for the exception of one spot in his route, which was called the Canadian Creek Road, which is a road that goes to the peat moss plant in my district. And I've seen some pictures of pretty amazing, the amount of snow and how quick it would build up in a short period of time. And also on Facebook, I noticed the snowplow operator out in the Halliburton Road. I'm not sure his name, but really tough area out there. It snows there sometimes in August, I believe, Mr. Speaker. But that's hard. That road was blocked off all afternoon and evening yesterday, and they were working at trying to get it open. But I also, too, want to pick up on the Premier's comments on, as the MLA that represents Hockeyville, Canada in 2017, Josh Curry's accomplishment last night. I did watch the first period of the game. I did switch over to hope to see the Senators beat the Habs, but I did watch Josh play for a little while, and I did look at the box scores afterwards, and he did play in the fourth line for the Pittsburgh Penguins, first game back in the NHL with that particular team, and he did play actually 7 minutes and 24 seconds, and he was a plus-minus of even, which is quite an accomplishment, Mr. Speaker. So I really want to thank him for that, and once again keeping PEI front and center in producing tremendous hockey players, as well as Colton Ellis' connection to the Charlottetown Islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, certainly a pleasure to be back here in the legislature today, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to acknowledge and say a warm hello to all the ones that may be tuned in or watching online from District 26, Albert and Bloomfield. And Mr. Speaker, it was great to hear both the Leader of the Opposition and my Cabinet colleague, the Minister of Social Development and Housing, reference McCausland's woolen blankets. And McCausland's, they are in District 26, a fantastic product. It'd be great if everybody in PEI, on days like we have today and nights like we had last night, had the McCausland's woolen blanket to cover themselves up with. And Mr. Speaker, the minister or the member from, we're going back here a bit, aren't we? The member from O'Leary Inverness, he stole my thunder there a little bit. But I think it's important. Yesterday I had the privilege to rise here, acknowledge the great work of those who had performed the testing over the weekend in response to the COVID clusters, the tremendous amount of tests that were carried out, the lab workers who did the analysis on these tests, Mr. Speaker. But also, last evening, I have to say, it was probably one of the worst drives that I ever did have going west. And I did take Highway 2, not the Trans-Canada. But having said that, what was bad about it was the visibility. Never once did I have to worry that I was going to run into a bank on the road or whatever. It was salted, it was cleared, and for that we have to recognize and give a shout out and a big thank you to our essential workers, plow drivers, and salt truck drivers. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in the House today and welcome everyone back. The news that we heard from Dr. Morrison this morning was certainly welcome, and I know a great deal of people in my district will breathe easier with this news, so we certainly appreciate it. We thank Dr. Morrison for her leadership and everyone who has been involved in rolling out programs and administering support behind the scenes. I can tell you my district appreciates it. And while I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I would really like to wish my parents a happy anniversary today. They were married on March 3rd, 1973, and they are avid watchers of the goings-on in this legislature. And I would say my parents are also huge supports for me. I don't know how I would ever manage with two small children if I didn't have the privilege of them being able to step in. So just wanted to wish them a happy anniversary and welcome everyone back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier referenced this as well as the member from O'Leary Inverness. And yes, on a cold, snowy night when we're homebound, a lot of people would be tuning in to watch the Senators play against the Montreal Canadiens. But in District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow, a lot of people last night were tuned in to the Pittsburgh Penguins Philadelphia Flyers game because, of course, a member of District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow, Josh Curry, was playing his first game with the Pittsburgh Penguins. The member mentioned the time on the ice, and after talking to his father, Stephen, this morning, we also came to the conclusion that as a rookie, he got some penalty killing time, and he was lucky enough to get on the power play as well. So congratulations to Josh. A lot of people would be familiar with Josh and his time as the captain with the PEI Rocket, and of course he was recently named the captain of the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Of course now he's got his time up with Pittsburgh. The hope is that he'll be back in the lineup again on Thursday night when the Penguins meet the Flyers, but Josh, just on behalf of all the residents of District 10, Charlottetown, Winslow, we want to wish you the best and say congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, the Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great privilege to rise today. Welcome back to everyone, and hello to the good folks in District 9. I may be a bit biased, but I do believe it's the greatest district on here in Prince Edward Island, so hi, everyone. I also want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of our early childhood educators and all those involved in the early learning centers. You have stepped up in incredible ways over the last couple of days, and I appreciate you. Our government appreciates you. I think everybody in this house, I know everyone in this house appreciates you, so thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I understand the Premier met with the Prime Minister yesterday, and it was just wonderful to hear that one of the priorities that they spoke of was our early learning and childcare sector. That was swelled my heart, and I know the Premier and I speak often regarding the importance of the sector, but it's just so important that that's taken to the federal level as well, and I'm really excited to see our budget roll out as well as the federal government's. And finally, Mr. Speaker, last night I went to bed smiling. I couldn't stop thinking about Clem Campbell and his smiley face pins and the discussion that ensued yesterday regarding the motion, and I was thinking about our Minister of Fisheries and Communities and all the kind words he had to say. So as we move forward in the days to come here, in the weeks to come, let's just remember to smile. Let's think about Clem. Let's think about our kids. Let's think about kindness and ensure that kindness is at the heart of every decision. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to rise today and wish everybody home in Kensington, Malpeque good afternoon. I hope everybody's well. I also want to take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to give the House an update on how our programs are rolling out. I want to start off by thanking all the government officials behind the scenes that are putting these programs out. I called last night at 10 o'clock, and the staff were still rolling out programs at 10 o'clock last night. Which was remarkable. Yesterday alone, on our $500 program, there were 764 applied. It went out yesterday morning at 10 o'clock. There were 764 applied, and we've got 155 approvals as of this morning, which is tremendous. That's money out the door, so phenomenal. I want to thank ITSS, the web team, and all our department for the tireless work that's going into these programs, as well as the employee gift card, grocery card program. As of this morning, there was 58 businesses have applied for that program for a total of 463 employees. So that's 463 gift cards gone out. So pretty remarkable accomplishments from these staff, government officials behind the scenes that are working for Islanders. So I just want to give them a shout out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Did we miss anyone? No? I'll take a turn, honourable members, but I won't take up much of your time. Honourable members, I'm a man of history. But when there's change to take place, I accept change. But at a young age of 49, it's hard to adapt to the change. It's like when we changed our district name, like it used to be Morale Mermaid. I have a hard job getting that through. Like at my age of 49, now it's Morale Donut. But Morale Mermaid is my next door neighbor, so I have, it's like when the opposition changes his house leaders and whips and the seats, Sometimes you catch yourself, and you got to look down, and you catch yourself, And when the Premier changed his cabinet, and when he changed his cabinet members, and when the Minister of see what I mean? Education and lifelong learning stood up to table a document, and as a speaker, here I am correcting people for their mistakes in the House. So it's only right that the speaker stands up and corrects his mistake in public. So when the Honourable Minister tabled a document, her seconder was the Minister of Transportation. And I said, no, Minister, you need a new seconder. And then she sent me a message, why do I need a new seconder? And I looked down in the Minister of Transportation and I went, so my apologies to the Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning and the Status of Women for my mistake yesterday. Thank you. Okay, statements by members. The Honourable Member from Montcrew-Kilmuir.
First up, it's hard to follow you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize an important community project moving forward in my district of Montague-Kilmuir. For close to half a century, Inclusions East has provided valuable housing, employment, and community service for adults living with an intellectual disability. The Kingswood Centre in Montague opened in 1976, and after 45 years has exhausted the building's shelf life. Inclusions East is finalizing the plans for a building to replace the 45-year-old Kingswood Centre, and after years of work and planning, plans have been finalized to modernize its facilities and build an independent living center for 11 people with intellectual disabilities. The new facility will have more space and improved physical accessibility, improved industrial arts programming for woodworking, ceramics, and laser engraving, expanded programming and enterprise space such as a bakery and woodworking shop, and a large commercial kitchen and gluten-friendly kitchen space. A second phase of the project will include a full-service cafe, multi-sensory rooms, and additional accessibility features. Inclusions East is hoping to complete work as early as next fall, and the building will be physically located in Brudenell. Mr. Speaker, Inclusions East helps clients integrate into the workforce and offers supports to both employees and employers. They help match clients' skills and seeks to try to find jobs that may fit well with their abilities and interests. Mr. Speaker, Inclusions East does amazing work for our people in our community, and I applaud the many dedicated volunteers and staff that have made this vision a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to it being my parents' anniversary, March 3rd is also World Wildlife Day, and it has been since 2003. The United Nations has been celebrating this, Mr. Speaker, as a way of bringing awareness to the species loss that we are experiencing and the importance of protecting biodiversity. It's more important than ever to ensure that we're balancing the needs of both people and the needs of the planet. Too often, we're falling short on both. Traditional knowledge has a lot to teach us about having a more sustainable relationship with nature's systems. There's an urgent need to break clear from the current trends of environmental decline, and the coming decade is critical. The UN's campaign for World Wildlife Day this year will be using the hashtag #DoOneThingToday, encouraging all of us today to make a difference and help wildlife conservation. What can you do today? You can set a goal to have a smaller environmental footprint. You can encourage your community, your school, your service club, your government, and businesses to take up projects to protect and improve natural spaces. You can volunteer. There are so many organizations that could use a hand. Or you can volunteer on your own, Mr. Speaker, to clean up beaches or forests or even your own community. You can stay informed. Learn more about species at risk, inform yourself on current environmental matters, and be aware of your individual impact on ecosystems and wildlife. Think globally, act locally. And for my hashtag #DoOneThingToday, I'll be contacting the Environment Minister to talk about collaborating on species at risk legislation. Because it's great to acknowledge days like today in the House, Mr. Speaker, but we're in the unique position of actually being able to do something about it. 2 environment ministers now have been telling me this would happen, and we're still waiting. Minister, I'll be in touch. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a constituent who is a single parent with 3 jobs. She has a part-time cashier position at Sobeys, she picks up shifts at the corner store, and she does commercial cleaning on call with a local company on evenings and weekends. She never knows how many hours she'll get or what her shifts may be. None of these pay more than a few cents over minimum wage. As they are part-time or contracts, she gets no benefits or paid leave. She's lucky she has family who can help with childcare when she gets called in on short notice. She makes just enough, most months, to cover rent, food and bills, but she's always in fear that her shifts will be cut and she'll be left short. Another constituent is a full-time third-year university student who works 35 hours a week on top of his studies at a food service job so he has enough money to pay rent and eat. His student loans are already maxed out to cover tuition and books. He works evenings, sometimes misses labs and classes, and his marks are slipping. He's worried he might not pass all of his courses this year, and he has to be out of the room that he rents in a shared apartment by the end of April and has no idea where he's going to go or how he's going to pay for it. Last week, I spoke to a woman up west who spends 60% of her income on housing. She misses work shifts she desperately needs to take because she hasn't been able to afford snow tires for her car. Those missed shifts mean she doesn't have enough for rent this month, and she needed to find out how many days grace she has before she can be evicted, and if there's any help available for her. On the weekend, I got a letter from a woman who has been struggling with poverty, addiction, and the associated mental health issues for her entire life. Despite those challenges, she has raised a healthy family and is a strong community volunteer. She has been on the road to recovery with the help of employment and counselling programs after a number of years on social assistance. However, employment at a seasonal minimum wage job has meant she's lost access to all of the other supports that she needs for her ongoing recovery and mental health. No counselling, no rental assistance, no medical supports, no caseworker. She feels abandoned and completely desperate, caught in a system that doesn't see her. Mr. Speaker, this is what precarious employment looks like. It is unstable, poorly paid, unreliable, with few, if any, worker rights and no representation. Being precariously housed could mean that you're living in a place that is in a state of disrepair or living in a spot that's overcrowded or unaffordable. While this may not be the experience of members of this House, it is the experience of thousands of islanders. These are islanders, are people that we represent. They deserve to be seen, they deserve to be heard, and just because their experience is not yours, it does not mean that you can dismiss it outright and expect not to hear how that makes islanders feel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions by members, starting with response to questions taken as notice. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in response to a question taken as notice yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 rapid testing pilot project at the Charlottetown Airport began on Tuesday, February 23rd, to help inform the province's testing approach going forward, including the feasibility of use at other points of entry. Testing travelers on arrival to PEI has been very important in controlling the transmission of the virus in the province. With the emergence of variants of concern, there is heightened risk associated with the importation of COVID-19 into PEI. Many travelers arriving in PEI, such as rotational workers, work isolators, international travelers, are required to get tested, Mr. Speaker, on day 0 to 1, 4 to 6, and 9 to 11 when they arrive in the province. This requirement does not change whether the pilot project is in place. The project allows them to receive their first test at the airport. Isolation requirements are still in place. However, Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, we have had to redeploy resources from the airport to 3 additional pop-up clinics to assist with additional testing capacity. 41 swabs were collected before the current outbreak. The pilot project is on pause in order to divert resources to where they are most needed at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And for our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The throne speech on page 15 says this: "Our island truly thrives when everyone is treated equitably. We all know that everyone enters this world into unique circumstances and that reality profoundly shapes, for better or worse, the pathways available to those individuals." A question to the Premier. Do you feel, as the throne speech infers, that government has a role to play to create the equity on Prince Edward Island that will allow all islanders to thrive?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the question, and I do. I think government can play an incredible role in ensuring that there's more equity across the board for all islanders. And just reflecting upon the House statement just delivered by the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere, Mr. Speaker, I think there's not a person in this House that does not want to avoid hearing those stories, by acting to try to make life better for all of those islanders, Mr. Speaker. I believe every islander is equal in my eyes, and I want to continue to try to operate a government that recognizes that, but also to be honest and open with all islanders in our recognition, Mr. Speaker, that in many regards we're not doing enough.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Premier, for your candid words. We often talk about how social cohesion and strong community ties are things that make Prince Edward Island such a vibrant and a caring place to live. Indeed, economists tell us that the strongest societies are not necessarily the richest ones at all, but they are those with those strong ties, with limited inequality. Yesterday, we heard from a member of your cabinet that by acknowledging those systemic inequalities that cause individual islanders distress and hurt our collective well-being, government would be, and I quote, encouraging them to be victims. Question to the Premier, do you share this perspective?
Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't in the legislature yesterday afternoon, and I missed a couple of significant discussions. And Mr. Speaker, I think that the Honourable Minister has apologized for that choice of words, and I'm glad that he did. I don't think that recognizing we have a challenge here makes a victim of anybody, Mr. Speaker. I think, as I indicated in the opening statement during my welcoming remarks, that our words in here are very, very important. Our words here can bring cheer and joy to your heart, and they can rip your heart out, Mr. Speaker. And I think we have to be always careful of that. I look back at my own now 49 years of life, and some of the things that I have said and written, Mr. Speaker, are of great personal embarrassment to myself now, and you can only try to learn to be better in the process of that. But no, Mr. Speaker, I don't support that statement at all, and I think we're here to help islanders. That's our job, and if we're not here to help islanders, Mr. Speaker, none of us should be in here.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, and once more I appreciate your remarks, Premier. The throne speech also says this: this province must always be a warm and loving place, a home for every person who chooses to be here. We know, having listened to many marginalized groups, that that is not always the case. One of the principles of allyship is to recognize our own privilege and to be constantly researching and learning about where our blind spots may be. Done with proper intention, this is an ongoing, often uncomfortable, and always humbling process. To the Premier, the Department of Social Development and Housing is a place where many marginalised islanders seek support. Do you think it is important for the Cabinet Minister in that portfolio to have a deep understanding of and an empathy for the people that their department serves?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I absolutely too. I believe I've been blessed with the both ministers who have served under my premiership in that capacity do have big hearts and are there for that reason, Mr. Speaker. I think it's unfortunate that the minister who has now apologized for his remark, I think he has deep regret for saying that. I don't believe in all of the time that I've known him personally or professionally that he feels that way. I think of all of the members in our caucus, and I think all of our caucus members could validate this comment, Mr. Speaker, that I don't know any MLA who has more open dialogue with all of his constituents, all of the people he serves, and he has a wonderful big heart, and he's a gracious person, Mr. Speaker. He's deeply regretful for his comment, as am I, and I think he will continue to be a tremendous asset to our government in this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And it's great, of course, to hear the Premier in these answers and in other ways give his personal commitment to support all islanders, particularly young islanders. And I'm deeply concerned, however, that Cabinet members are providing mixed messages, particularly from ministers who ought to know better. A question to the Minister of Social Development and Housing. Apologies notwithstanding, what did you mean when you said this morning that your comments yesterday were uninformed?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, these are very serious issues. And Mr. Speaker, I think the Premier has said many times, none of us can claim to have all the answers. Mr. Speaker, we're all learning, we're all growing, and the comments I made yesterday when I say they were uninformed, it's simply because I haven't shared the life experiences of people who are impacted in that way in many cases, and I'll freely admit that. And I do have a lot to learn, and that's why it's so important to me to engage stakeholders, to engage people who are impacted, and to learn from them. And that's what I pledge to do in this role, and I pledge to serve Islanders, of course, in the best ways possible, and provide those supports to youth that they deserve. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Social Development and Housing told us that he doesn't understand what precarious employment is and that he doesn't believe it exists in PEI. He described low-wage precarious work, even unpaid work, as an opportunity for character building. He also said that we should stop pointing out the problems with precarious or low-paying work, lest we make our youth victims. Despite your brief apology earlier, Islanders need to know, do you consider the stories that I shared in my member's statement earlier to be good character-building experience, or does it make these people victims?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that my comments were interpreted that way, but and if they were, I apologize for that too. And in fact, they were said, and that's what they mean. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I've done a little bit of research. I've been briefed. There is precarious employment. It's not a good thing. I listened with a sad heart to the statement from the member earlier today. And Mr. Speaker, I know the Department of Social Development and Housing, and I think all my colleagues would like to reach out and help those people as much as possible. If we can provide them with any supports, please reach out to me and my department, and we will help them in any way possible. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we're all a bit shocked that the Minister is only learning about this in the last 24 hours. After all, his previous position as the Minister of Education was dealing specifically with youth. So it is quite a large gap, Mr. Speaker, and one that's very worrying. We've heard a lot about the gig economy and how it is not only the new reality for many people, but can provide new opportunities for employment. The other side of that story is that gig work is, by its very definition, precarious. It's unprotected, insecure, unreliable, and often poorly paid. This isn't news to the young people of PEI. In fact, our Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture has spoken about the opportunity in gig economy. But these people who are working in this space have been working without security, benefits, and for low wages for a long, long time. Question for the Minister of Social Development and Housing. How do you suggest Islanders working minimum wage in precarious employment can save for their education, a down payment on a house, or for the rental deposit?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, obviously there's more work to be done here. There's challenges that we face. I need to listen. We all need to listen to the issues, understand them deeply, because they're very personal issues, but also we need to work together on those solutions. And I think the member across has brought forward some good solutions. I know she has a bill that she brought forward for the elimination of poverty, or will be bringing forward, and I look forward to working with her on that, and I know the department does as well. So I think if we work together to fully understand the depth of the issues and work together on the solutions, we can do the work necessary to address them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would point out that it's not our job to educate the Minister. He needs to be listening to his constituents because they're contacting us and we're hearing these stories, and we always have. I personally hear from Islanders from tip to tip about the unaffordable, unsafe and inappropriate housing conditions that they are experiencing because of the ongoing housing crisis. Stories of black mold, frozen pipes, heating being turned off at night, unexplained rent increases. It never ends. And in fact, we discussed this in a committee, Mr. Speaker, a few weeks ago, at which the Minister was present. Yet, the Minister for Social Development and Housing still thinks that anyone experiencing housing problems should just move, or better yet, buy a house. A question for that minister. Are you aware that if you're precariously employed, you can't actually qualify for a traditional mortgage?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, these are all definitely issues that we need to address. Mr. Speaker, there's lots of tools in the toolbox, to use that phrase, and you know the down payment assistance plan is one of them, and perhaps there are barriers to that, and I want to work with the member, I want to work with the Minister of Finance to remove those barriers. We want to help everyone to be successful on this island, whether, as the member said, they're saving for education, whether they lack appropriate housing, and that's exactly what the Department of Social Development and Housing is there to do. And I think we made good strides. I give the former minister a lot of credit there in the department, and the Premier as well as the members across. And we're going to continue to make strides in the future. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, a landlord posted on social media about how he is making a list of all the tenants who complain or who post in tenancy advocacy groups. He calls them low-quality, unrepeatable word, renters. Clearly, he doesn't know that landlords are not permitted to create or circulate bad tenant lists under federal privacy legislation. An individual's personal information cannot be collected, used, or shared without informed consent. Question for the Minister. Will your department immediately inform the Landlords Association and any individuals participating in this illegal activity to cease and desist?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, as the member is aware, the responsibility for the the new Residential Tenancy Act and the Rental of Residential Properties Act actually falls under IRAC and the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. But, Mr. Speaker, I've been advocating for that actually to be centralized in the spot, and I would like to work with the Minister of Education to do exactly what the member says. And Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to talk about the rental registry, Mr. Speaker. It's something I was just reading an email I received from the director of the residential, the IRAC office responsible for residential properties about the rental registry, and we have work to do there. And Mr. Speaker, I want to commit right now today, we have funds earmarked, and we're going to go out and we're going to find out exactly how we can do a rental registry properly so that we can make it a reality. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the commitment. I think that's the third or fourth time I've heard the commitment, but I appreciate it, and the fact there's money there, that's great. However, in your announcing of that news, you've missed the point. So I'm going to ask the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning, who is also the Minister responsible for IRAC and the Residential Tenancy Act, will you take immediate action to address the breach of privacy that is occurring by the creation of a bad tenants list by some landlords in PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Speaker. In November, I asked the former Education Minister to renew the provincial moratorium on student loan payments. It's February, and students are still waiting for an answer from this government. This is a significant monthly expense of lots of recent graduates, and they are asking for help. Question to the Education Minister. Can you think of any other group of islanders that we knew were struggling in this pandemic that we've intentionally ignored in the same way?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really surprised to hear the members say that. To be quite honest, since starting this department, I think that our group, our Student Support Services group, they've done an incredible job in terms of supporting our students, especially during these times. In the last number of years, we've made significant investments in non-repayable assistance for post-secondary students, including the George Coles and Island Advantage bursaries. The George Coles bursary is currently supporting 1,794 island students, and the Island Advantage bursary, which we saw an increase to the budget in 2020-2021 by $700,000. There's currently 1,178 island students who are taking advantage of this. Mr. Speaker, there's 1,300 island students who are receiving free tuition this year. That's including the cost of textbooks and fees. Our Provincial student loan program is there for students who will require additional financial support above and beyond their Canadian student loan. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure if the minister is intentionally trying to just message her way out of that, or if she is ignoring what I asked, which is about putting in place a moratorium on the provincial portion of student loan repayments like the student union has been asking for. I have been getting letters from recent students, as I'm sure all members of this House have been. This is a huge impact on people's lives. Recent graduates shouldn't have to wait for the minister to have a photo op on this. Maybe the new minister will give me a straight answer. Does your government intend to reinstate the moratorium on student loan repayments? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I too have been receiving those letters. Most certainly, we care about our students. We're here to support them. We are leading the country in terms of what we offer our students. So what we've done, we've implemented several policies to support borrowers. Students are not required to make payments on their provincial student loans as long as they remain as full-time students. Students do not begin repaying their student loans until 1 year after they cease to be a full-time student. PEI offers 0 interest on provincial loans. PEI student loan borrowers who earn less than $30,000 gross per year are not required to make payments on their PEI student loans. Mr. Speaker, there's opportunities for exemption. They need to reach out to the department and we will work with them to support them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't hear in that on whether or not they would be reinstating the moratorium on the provincial student loans, which I've now asked about twice and have asked about in this House before. So, Mr. Speaker, a student loan moratorium is important, and our budget goes even further than, our budget ask, goes further than that. We've been calling on government to forgive $2.8 million of student debt this year and put more money back in the hands of young people. A question to the Minister of Education: how much student debt will your government forgive in the upcoming budget?
The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning.
Mr. Speaker, we haven't yet tabled the budget, so I'm excited to review that with the member across, and certainly when I sit on the floor, we can answer some of these questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You can be sure I will be asking questions during that time. I'd also like to draw attention to the challenges of international students. They face unique employment challenges and are often not eligible for government support programs. A question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning: what specifically are you doing to support the well-being of international students during the pandemic?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much to the honourable member for the question. Certainly it's great to see somebody who is so passionate about our student population. As the member Cross knows, I am, and most definitely it's just wonderful to get these questions today. So thanks to the member for asking them. In terms of what we've done for our international students, I think, if I look across jurisdictions, I think we're one of the only jurisdictions whereby we've actually helped support our international students when it comes to self-isolation. I need to confirm that with my department, but that is most certainly something that we put in place to ensure that when international students get here, they're safe, we protect our islanders, and they can continue to support our local economy and contribute to our culture and our province as a whole. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was shocked as I looked over the vaccine rollout that I did not see school personnel and early childhood personnel included on the list. I sent a letter or a written question to the minister, and when we met a bit later, she told me that teachers were on the list. That they were considered essential workers and indeed would be part of the Phase 2 rollout. Question to the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. There were 2 groups mentioned on this list. They're not just teachers, so I'd like some confirmation. When you say teachers, do you mean all school personnel and all personnel who work in early childhood? Are they considered essential, and will they be included in Phase 2 of the rollout?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, honourable member, for the question. I do appreciate that you posed it a couple of times with me, and most certainly, as we've done with all of our decisions around COVID, we take our guidance from our incredible Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Morrison. So as Dr. Morrison had indicated yesterday, there will be 100,000 doses distributed throughout April to June. Every islander over 16, they should have a single dose by June, so that includes all of our frontline essential workers, and yes, our educational staff and our early childhood educators would be included in that. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is for the Minister of Education and Early Learning and the Minister responsible for the Island Regulatory Appeal Commission. There are a great deal of confusion surrounding the release of the IRAC report into the sale of Brendale Farms. As the Minister will recall, the former government denied the sale as it didn't appear to be compliant with the Lands Protection Act. But when this government was elected in 2019, the sale went ahead. After that, there's been a lot of saga and stories, finger-pointing, buck passing, the list goes on. In part, the problem lies with the refusal of the Minister of Agriculture and Land to release the IRAC investigation to sale to the public. Question: what is the point of IRAC investigation into a matter of public interest if only cabinet ministers are allowed to review the report? Does the minister responsible for the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission feel the report should be made public?
The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning, Minister responsible for the status of women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I don't think I'm bringing information that the member across doesn't know to the House today, but I will certainly try to answer his question as best I can. Mr. Speaker, so IRAC operates at an arm's length from government. IRAC reports to Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island through me, the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning. The IRAC falls under the Education and Lifelong Learning because our department is unlikely to be in conflict with any commission business such as land use or utilities. The Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission Act, that creates its independence, and under that act, the Minister does not have the authority to direct work under the Commission. They make their own rules and procedures, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I was asking the Minister the question if she felt that the report should be released, not necessarily I was looking for her opinion on that. But anyway, there's many pointed criticisms of the Island Regulatory Appeal Commission, and they have primarily come from the government benches, Mr. Speaker, notably the member from Montague-Kilmuir and the Minister of Fisheries and Communities. In the Minister's view, has IRAC been fulfilling its duties, and does IRAC have a role to play in overseeing land purchases on PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I feel that I should stand up here and talk about this report that government doesn't want to release. I've said from the beginning I want this report released, Mr. Speaker, and I know I've been subpoenaed, Mr. Speaker, which is a great process that took place, which I legally can release the report to the Standing Committee Friday, Mr. Speaker, and I will hand deliver that. I want to be very clear on that. But, Mr. Speaker, what IRAC does is IRAC, they are arm's length again. They took quite a bit of time to get this investigation done, Mr. Speaker, and obviously I had no control over that, Mr. Speaker, and they are at arm's length, and I don't agree with everything that took place here, Mr. Speaker, but I do know that this government is standing up to this, Mr. Speaker, and want to make this right. So I am committed to the end of this, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of O'Leary Inverness, your second supplementary.
Yes, I'll go back to the Minister responsible for IRAC again, Mr. Speaker. In October 2020, IRAC said the decision to release the report belonged to the Minister of Agriculture and Land, who could have easily vetted the document through the Freedom of Information months ago. Minister responsible for the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission, do you agree with that assessment, and have you addressed this matter with your cabinet colleague from Agriculture Land, and what advice did you give him as Minister responsible for Island Regulatory Appeal Commission?
The Honourable Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I had previously said, IRAC is independent. Under the Act, the Minister does not have the authority to direct the work of the Commission. They make their own rules, they make their own procedures. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, a question for the Minister responsible for the Island Regulatory Appeal Commission. It's very easy for MLAs to attack the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission. For instance, many islanders hold IRAC responsible for increases to gas prices, which always are a controversial matter, Mr. Speaker. It's difficult for IRAC to defend itself, as the Minister just stated. They are independent due to their inability to comment publicly. Back in September 2018, the current Minister of Fisheries tweeted, "It's time for IRAC to go." As the Minister responsible for the Island Regulatory Appeal Commission, have you met with your colleague to discuss this publicly stated desire to get rid of IRAC and the role it plays as a public regulator?
The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government, we have a lot of priorities that we're clearly hearing today that the Tenancy Act is of importance, and that needs to get done. We need to ensure that act is renewed and refreshed to reflect the current realities of this province. Also, Mr. Speaker, our Lands Protection Act, that's no easy feat. That's requiring an abundance of time, and most certainly we can look at an evaluation of IRAC as we move forward. But we do, Mr. Speaker, we have our priorities in line, and I think in the line of questioning today, it's important to note that the Tenancy Act as well as the Lands Protection Act, those are priorities for this House. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mallory, Inverness.
So the minister is now saying that Island Regulatory Appeal Commission has a role to play in Prince Edward Island, and it's a valuable role, Mr. Speaker. So does the minister, I'm assuming from that statement then, that she does not agree with the colleague in front of her there, the Minister of Fisheries. What is the minister's view of what role the organisations such as IRAC should play in dealing with island land transactions? What role should it play?
The Honourable Minister of Education, Lifelong, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not going to stand here and defend IRAC, Mr. Speaker, but they do play an important role here, Mr. Speaker, in the transactions of lands. They do a very diligent reports on every land purchase, Mr. Speaker, that is offered to them, Mr. Speaker. So they do play an important role, Mr. Speaker, and they do have the staff, the knowledge to ensure all lands transactions are above board. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Larry Inverness, your second supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, very interesting that one minister now says, I'm not defending IRAC, and another minister gave some illusions that she is defending IRAC, that it plays a significant role. And then we have another minister that says it should go. Does the minister responsible for the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission believe that the Island Regulatory Appeals Commission should go? And what, that's the same question I already asked. Getting all worked up. In this legislature, the Minister of Agriculture and Land stated that it was the Business Corporation Act that prevented the department from determining the actual owners of the land transactions done under the Corporations Act. Yet, when asked in committee, the Island Regulatory Appeal Commission stated it had no problem finding out shareholders of land and PEI. Does the minister responsible for IRAC feel there are any impediments in the way of government finding out who owns the land?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Well, Mr. Speaker, these are very, very, very interesting questions and very confusing questions. They're going back and forth here, Mr. Speaker, but it seems he's grabbing at something, and we started talking about the Business Corporation Act, Mr. Speaker. The former government changed that, Mr. Speaker. They took that away, Mr. Speaker. This government brought it back, Mr. Speaker. More transparency, Mr. Speaker, and that's what it's all about. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Larry Inverness.
Now, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture and Land, Mr. Speaker. And it's very interesting that he says the Business Corporation made it more difficult. No, Mr. Speaker, the Island Regulatory Appeal Commission stated it has no problem finding out who the shareholders are of property and land in Prince Edward Island. Question to the Minister of Agriculture. You have the IRAC report into the Brendell Farms matter. And yes, without divulging any of the details, can you give the Coles Notes version without releasing the report of what that report says?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Friday at 2:30 when I drop that report, Mr. Speaker, I hope the committee, the committee, you can ask them for the Coles Note, Mr. Speaker, because this minister will not break the law, but if the committees chose to break the Freedom of Information Act, they can choose to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Larry Inverness, your first supplementary.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. We certainly know that the minister has received it, and if he's going to release it on Friday or some of the information on Friday, that's certainly appreciative. You certainly claim that you can't release the report because of confidentiality and privacy concerns. If you wanted to release this report, why didn't you simply put the report through the Freedom of Information process yourself? Why wait for somebody else to do it, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Mr. Speaker, as the Attorney General, I follow the letter to the law. Whether I'm the Attorney General or not, Mr. Speaker, I'm a man of integrity who's going to follow the letter of the law, Mr. Speaker. I asked the commissioner, the privacy commissioner, for her advice. Her advice was to send it, it had to go through the Freedom of Information. That's what I did, Mr. Speaker. That's what I did. Mr. Speaker, Cole's notes are not, Mr. Speaker, the investigation, even if it was redacted, everyone knows the names, Mr. Speaker. Everyone knows the names. It wouldn't have been that hard to figure out. But anyway, you're getting the unredacted, the whole bundle, Mr. Speaker, the whole bundle. So see you at 2:30 Friday.
Honourable member for Moratorium, Inverness, your second supplementary.
Well, that's good to hear, Mr. Speaker, that we are going to get this details on Friday at 2:30, and that's once again, we've heard many other deadlines that have passed on this, so let's hope that this one happens, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I appreciate the Minister for his comments. Minister, you will commit to release this document on 2:30 on Friday.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Lands.
God willing, Mr. Speaker, God willing. Thank you.
The Honourable member from Montague Kilmuir. The Honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just changing gears just a little bit. Today my questions are for the Minister of Health. First of all, last fall, when I first rose in the House, I asked the former Minister of Health, just with regards to some questions on the new fertility support program, which did start the first of this year. Just a question to the Minister of Health. I do realize that it is only in its infancy, but I'm curious if there is an update on the rollout of the program thus far.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would have anticipated that if it had been Montague Kilmuir that was asking the question to me, that it most likely would have been about Kings County Memorial. But I do appreciate the question coming forward from the Honourable Member. Yes, and I do have to give a tremendous amount of credit to the former Minister of Health and Wellness for taking the bull by the horns and getting this program up and going. You look at the two different aspects of fertility supports, Mr. Speaker. You have medical workups, which are covered right across the province. I do believe that there are 4 different facilities, West Prince, Summerside, here in Charlottetown and in Kings County, that provide the medical workups. And then there's a great program that was brought in, as I say, by my predecessor, the former Minister of Health and Wellness, the fertility supports, which come in on November 6th, actually my birthday, Mr. Speaker, November 6th of last fall. Thank you.
The Honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if I got the answer how the program has been going so far, but a further question to that. I'm assuming that the program has maybe faced a little bit of complications from the closure of the Atlantic bubble. Question to the Minister, the same Minister, are Islanders still able to travel off-island for the treatments with the current Atlantic bubble travel restrictions?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And within going back, I guess, to give a little bit more information or clarity with regard to the member's first question, or the first month, there were 9 applications that did come in under that program. Certainly, COVID, the Atlantic bubble, restrictions that have been in place have impacted procedures, not only here in the province, but right across the Maritimes and across around the world, Mr. Speaker. But certainly, if those procedures are available and can be scheduled in, they would be allowed to travel off-island when the individuals do return to the province. If they're out of the province, as the member is aware, for more than a 24-hour period, they would have to self-isolate upon their returns. In the event that the procedures or the meeting with specialist physicians in Halifax took place and that the individuals could return within that 24-hour period, then they would not have to self-isolate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Winslow, your second supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the update on the number and, of course, with the direction for people that are requiring the service. Now, you had mentioned the clinic in Halifax. There is another one in the Maritimes, the Concepcia Clinic in Moncton. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but due to the COVID restrictions, that clinic has had to reduce service by as much as 75%, and I believe that no new clients are being accepted because of the COVID restrictions. Question to the Minister of Health: are there any contingency plans that are being considered in the event that the clinic in Moncton is only available to operate in a limited fashion for an extended period, which could create maybe some further backlogs for islanders looking to access this service?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's an excellent question from the member. You look across the country that there's approximately 18%, Mr. Speaker, of couples who experience fertility challenges, issues. We do, as a government, we have to recognize without a doubt the implications that COVID-19 has had with regard to delays, but I do give the member my word that I will follow up. I'm certainly appreciative of him bringing the information and the questions forward, and to see just what contingency plans that we may be able to work out there, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd just like to thank the honourable member from O'Leary Inverness for finally jumping on the bandwagon. So, recently, as we all know in this House, IRAC finally appeared in front of the Standing Committee of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability. IRAC had a long list of things that they would not talk to the Standing Committee about, but they certainly did have information on possible ways and concerning gaps that within the Lands Protection Act, and possible ways that an islander, an individual, could circumvent the Lands Protection Act. A question to the Minister of Agriculture and Land: why have you not consulted with IRAC on potential gaps within the Lands Protection Act?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member across is well aware, we're in the middle of a land matters process, Mr. Speaker, which we have a group of 12 incredible islanders that have volunteered their time to, Mr. Speaker, to come together so we can rebuild the Lands Protection Act, Mr. Speaker, to make it strong, that it can withstand the pressures of the time, Mr. Speaker, pressures that we have never seen before, Mr. Speaker. So it's important that this committee comes together and gets all the information, and it's islanders, Mr. Speaker, and they're hearing from groups across this island, Mr. Speaker, and I have with me the intern report from this committee, Mr. Speaker, that I would like to table later, Mr. Speaker, that shows what we've heard so far, Mr. Speaker, and it's just a midway report, Mr. Speaker, but I'm looking forward to their final report. Thank you.
The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Minister continuously brings up the Land Matters PEI Advisory Committee, and I would 100% agree. It is 12 members of upstanding islanders sitting on a committee doing their absolute best in order to bring forward recommendations for the Lands Protection Act and the Planning Act here in PEI, and that is so vitally important. However, as per IRAC, and if you listen to the Standing Committee, they made it quite clear, there is a long-standing convention against quasi-judicial officials commenting on the meaning of or the effect of provisions in a piece of legislation that the tribunal may be called upon to interpret in the future. IRAC's not going to talk to the advisory committee, but IRAC does talk to Executive Council. And I want to understand why the minister has not done any homework in this issue and is putting it all off on an advisory committee that truly can't get at all of the information. Why are you not doing any of your homework?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Executive Council has spoken with IRAC, Mr. Speaker, and we have done our homework, Mr. Speaker. And we are on this file, Mr. Speaker, that is a sensitive file, Mr. Speaker, and And I am committed to seeing this through to the end, Mr. Speaker. The advisory committee is an important step in this, Mr. Speaker. So is Executive Council. So is all of government, Mr. Speaker. And these questions are important, Mr. Speaker, that we get to the bottom of everything, Mr. Speaker, and we make the Lands Protection Act strong. So it's not just this generation, it's the next generation, Mr. Speaker, that Islanders have a chance to farm this land, Mr. Speaker. They have an opportunity to live on this land in proper use and for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of question period. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize March as Social Worker Awareness Month and to acknowledge the important role of all social workers. This profession is one that requires dedication, compassion, and empathy. Social workers help people to find success in areas of their lives where they might be experiencing challenges. Social workers help to identify the source or difficulty of a situation and support people to develop coping skills and find effective solutions to issues. With their unique training and experience, social workers can help people dealing with a range of issues, including relationship problems, stress, depression and anxiety, grief and loss, abuse and bullying, or the pressures related to being a caregiver. Mr. Speaker, they also work to protect children. Child protection social workers deal with some of the most heart-wrenching situations on a daily basis. I want to take a brief moment to appreciate the social workers who spend their days and evenings working with Islanders during their most challenging times. Mr. Speaker, for the last year during COVID-19, when many professions were able to work safely from home, our social workers continued to provide an essential service by visiting the homes of Islanders to ensure the safety of children and the well-being of families. Social workers are a group of dedicated, passionate professionals that often put the needs of others before their own. Mr. Speaker, I want to say thank you to all social workers in PEI. Your work is valued, your work is appreciated, and your work matters. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is an honour to be able to rise and recognise the invaluable work done by social workers in the province and around the world. When I was looking to sort of the background on the fact that there's a whole month dedicated to social workers, which is in itself quite a large statement, I found that I didn't know that there was an international federation of social workers that actually set standards, not just for education, but also about how that group of people can continually improve. And what struck me the most was about the focus on inclusive social transformation. I think in our times that we're in now, more than ever, we need to foster the active participation of all voices in our community, and particularly those who are often marginalized. And it's at the core of the profession of social work and social development that we think about all those voices when we want to build what is an inclusive social space. So that would include the development of new ways of delivering services and new social agreements between government and the populations that they serve, respecting universal human rights, opportunities, freedoms, and sustainable practices and services that really kind of meet the needs of all those diverse and marginalized populations. It's exciting to see that this area is progressing and changing just as much as anywhere else is, but it's also really important that we recognize how critical this work is to the health of our communities and our society. And again, extend our thanks to those who work in that very difficult but rewarding field in this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I too rise to say happy Social Worker Awareness Month. And you know, social work is an incredible profession. And just recently I was on a Zoom call with during Family Violence Prevention Month, and we were talking about violence against the family. And one of the UPI students that was on there said, "What do you want to do for a living?" And he said, "I want to be a social worker." And it was a very touching moment. And he said it with such confidence that You know, I was proud of him, and social workers have such crucial work. They care, they go above and beyond, and they don't put in 9 to 5 hours. This is a full profession, and they work incredibly hard. They're passionate and committed, and I would like to just say thank you for all the work you do, and much love from myself to you.
That's it for minister statements. One. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a petition with hundreds of signatures on behalf of the UPEI Student Union, students and alumni, urging government to expand the moratorium on the provincial portion of the student loans until September of this year. And I move, seconded by Charlottetown Belvedere, that the same be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry? The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise, seconded by the member from Morel-Donagh, to table written questions for the Minister of Health.
Shall it carry? No, that's it. Reports by committee. The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, and Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Deputy Speaker, and on behalf of the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management and yourself as Chair, I beg leave to introduce the unanimous report of the committee recommending that Ms. Emily Doron be appointed as Deputy Clerk of the Legislative Assembly, and I move, seconded by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the same name be now received and do lie on the table. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Rule 110.5 of the Rules of the Legislative Assembly, I will be moving this motion for adoption of the report tomorrow, Thursday, March the 4th, 2021.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Introduction of government bills. Motions other than government. The honourable member from Mermaid, Stratford, and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask that motion 14 now be read.
Shall it carry?
The honourable member for Summerside Wilmot moves, seconded by the honourable member for Charlottetown Victoria Park, the following motion. Whereas constituents have shared numerous examples of being treated poorly when accessing services from public services across departments, and whereas many constituents have had to request the help of an MLA to get any action or response from our systems, and whereas it is critical that we do not accept or allow that vulnerable islanders would have to navigate a system with any level of toxic culture that results in them not being heard, trusted, and helped. And whereas leadership across government must take a strong and vocal stand that this toxic culture is inappropriate and will not be tolerated. And whereas many islanders do not know what they can do when they see this kind of treatment or are the victims of it. And whereas legislation to create an ombudsperson office is currently before the Standing Committee on Legislative Assembly Management, and the creation of this office will provide a mechanism for the public to submit complaints. Therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to examine its workplace culture to ensure all islanders are treated with dignity and respect when accessing public services, and to implement trauma-informed training where necessary.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Mr. Speaker, in the time that I've been elected, I've noticed a distressing theme, and it centers around how people are treated when they're trying to access services and supports that are supposed to be there to help them in times of need. It really highlights to me what a deep-rooted problem we have. I've heard from a staggering number of people who have felt the way they were treated when they reached out for help was not just unhelpful, but was dehumanizing. This is in no way an isolated experience. I couldn't tell you how many people, for example, have told me about their experience trying to access workers' compensation supports. Multiple people tell stories of being laughed at, of being made to feel as if they are lying, if not outwardly accused of such, of feeling belittled and accused of being lazy. I had one gentleman say to me, I couldn't believe how happy she was to tell me I was denied. Still another person, pushing for over a year, being denied again and again, only finally had their claim accepted. Another woman said to me, I really believed that this would be here for me if I ever needed it. I thought they were on the side of the worker. I didn't ask to get hurt. I'd rather be working. I've heard these stories again and again. Mr. Speaker, people are trying to access these services after they've been hurt, after their income has been impacted, and while they are trying to figure out how to make it through the next little while until they can return to work. People tell me again and again they absolutely want to go back to work as soon as they can. I've had constituents tell me about the havoc this kind of treatment has played on their mental health. We're hearing of a culture of denial rather than a culture of support. But this is not in any way isolated to WCB. I have had many social assistance clients who have experienced similar things. I hear from people who work and advocate for this population who reiterate this. Their clients feel they have a better shot of being treated well if they are accompanied by someone else. This is a problem. Mr. Speaker, I know the workers who are on the front line of service delivery every day have hard jobs. For every one story I am hearing, I am sure they are hearing a dozen. They hear traumatic stories day in and day out, and the toll that takes on a person, I can only imagine. The prevalence of compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma is well documented. It can have a numbing effect on people. Heavy caseloads don't help. We need to ensure they too are in the best possible position to receive people. This needs to be part of the story. We hear it's about people. And if we're serious about that, we need to be willing to look at how our system is treating people. It's critical that we do not accept that vulnerable islanders would have to navigate a system with any level of a toxic culture that results in them being unheard, feeling untrusted, and not helped. It's time this gets brought to the forefront and solutions are considered. I see two pieces that need to be addressed. The first, we need a body that can receive complaints, and by gathering those stories, understand how truly widespread this is. I believe the Office of the Ombudsperson is long overdue, and I hope we'll be hearing more about that in this sitting. But just being able to report these issues isn't enough. My colleague, who is the seconder of this motion, speaks often of the need to take a trauma-informed approach. And the more stories I hear, the more convinced I am that government needs to examine the prevalence of these experiences and determine which departments should be first to introduce trauma-informed training. Compassionate and trauma-informed care is essential to providing effective services and supports, and in the absence of such training, a lot of harm gets done. This type of change is systemic and will only occur under the strong and committed leadership of a minister who is passionate about it and a government who believes in it. If this government really wants to help people, all people, they will rise to this challenge. And what does that mean? It means that every member in this House needs to be committed to the idea that every Islander deserves respect and dignity. We must all lead by example. We cannot enter this House and make statements that blame victims, be they victims of abuse, addictions, or of our systems. We cannot tell Islanders who are struggling against immeasurable hardships, like working in precarious jobs, making well below the livable wage, that they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps and work harder. The comments made by the Minister of Social Development and Housing yesterday were hard to listen to, and I understand he apologized for them since, but he also doubled down on them by the elevator privately to every member of my caucus, telling me that we need to stop making young people believe they are victims. So I found the apology a little thin. He's responsible for providing supports to some of our most vulnerable Islanders. It is not leadership that shows Islanders they deserve dignity and respect that I witnessed yesterday. We cannot continue to penalize people who need support. Our systems aren't broken. They're working exactly the way they've been designed to. The problem is they've been designed with the needs of a few in mind instead of the needs of many. We need to acknowledge that and change. Right here in this House, we have to start the conversation. We need to start talking about housing as a human right, about the needs for livable wages, about the absurdity of asking people to survive in a system that has been built against them. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues on all sides of this House on how they suggest we solve this problem to ensure all Islanders can expect to be treated with dignity and respect when they reach out for services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'll now go with the seconder of the motion, Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say how thrilled I am to be seconding this motion. It is something that I have wanted to talk about since being elected because it is the top concern I deal with on a daily basis. It's difficult to bring forward because it gives the impression that we are insulting the civil servants. It is not at all that, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. They are victims in the systems of which they work. It is the cultures created within these systems that are systemic. They are historic. They've been there for a long time. They're not new. I have to say, we have a huge problem that requires government leadership in a culture change. We, as members of the official opposition, have heard from many people their heartbreaking accounts of being treated disrespectfully while accessing government services. I know we have all heard these stories. I hope we have. Sometimes this looks like unreturned phone calls, name-calling, shaming. Sometimes it is not following up on something they said they would do. This involves making assumptions on a person's lifestyle and choices, etc. All of this to say that they have not been treated with dignity or respect, and as a result, life has been made harder for them in countless ways. Many times, their lives were already incredibly challenging. It is a struggle when we do not share a lived experience and find it difficult to understand the experiences of others. I'm not sure where this comes from, as I believe that the majority of people are inherently good, that they want to help their fellow human. This is a systemic issue, and while it involves individuals, we need to be mindful that they are a product of the system in which they serve. I hear of client caseloads being 250 clients to one service provider. Many of these clients may be living with extremely complex needs. I can imagine as a government employee, it can be overwhelming, devastating, and they certainly live with varying levels of vicarious trauma from hearing the stories of others, feeling helpless in what they can do. Years of working under these conditions would take a toll on a person. In this throne speech, the Premier speaks of many culture changes that need to happen, and this is one of them. This problem is so deeply connected to so many things: early intervention and prevention, education, poverty, domestic violence, among others. I'm going to say this again, I'm going to count in Hansard one day how many times I've said this. 1 in 5 children in Prince Edward Island have been abused. As domestic violence is so ingrained in our island culture, there's no reason to believe that these numbers have not always been incredibly high. Given that stat, roughly 5 or 6 of us in this room have lived with abuse. There is different data that tells us that resiliency is an incredibly important part of growing out of trauma in healthy ways. But the factors that contribute to this resiliency just don't exist for many. Some of these factors include having one safe and constant adult in their life, having access to timely and appropriate services, which unfortunately in the latter part of this sentence, in all of it, many simply do not have. These children are roaming the halls of our island schools, and many are not seen and never will be. These children grow into adults. I am not suggesting that every single person accessing government services are living with severe trauma, but I am saying that we have all grown with adverse life experiences. Just because we have experienced something in some way does not mean that it has been the same for everyone. It is important that we understand this. Trauma-informed approaches are being used all over the world in every area. A trauma-informed approach literally means we approach everyone with calm, with empathy, with understanding. It means that we understand the effects of trauma on the brain at even the most basic level, to know that yes, maybe you did call that person back a couple of times. Maybe you did already answer that question several times. But guess what? You may have to answer that same question over and over again, because the person may not have been able to process the answer at that time. But maybe, just maybe, they're ready to process it this time. Essentially, in treating everyone with this approach means that regardless of their life situation, they are being treated with dignity and respect. I was assured by the former Minister of Social Development and Housing that indeed their department does use a trauma-informed approach. I'm sorry to say I have a hard time believing that. So please, Minister, prove me wrong. Table the dates of these trainings. Table the training they used. How are you measuring the success of this training? And if you're looking for a program, there's a great one called Brain Story Certification from the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative. It is an online certification course that has received rave reviews and has been on my to-do list for a long time. This is a certification that Public Health New Brunswick is working hard on making a province-wide training, trying to get as many people as possible to take. I've attended various workshops on ACEs, not sure if everyone's familiar with that, but it's called Adverse Childhood Experiences, and how they lead to future health and success outcomes into the future for every individual. It is fascinating stuff, and if anyone in the House ever wants to talk about this at any time, I would be happy to talk about that. Islanders should never have to go through their MLA to get the most basic of services, which is their right as a citizen. It is ludicrous. Without sharing much detail, let me share with you some of the things that I've heard. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but a mom not eating because she has to buy her daughter new sneakers for school, and she does not receive any child support or any additional support. And so, social development and housing, there's something that just keeps happening with her payments all of the time, and despite her best attempts at trying to keep her records up to date, she still has to fight every single month to prove that indeed she does live in poverty. She said to me one time, "Man, I'd love to get a haircut." People living in unsafe, unsanitary conditions, black mold on the ceiling, leaking, gas leaks, and they have to move, but they cannot afford to find a place that is affordable, let alone safe, accessible. You know, and it's fabulous that the Minister of Social Development and Housing consistently says, you know, call this number if you need emergency shelter, and that is great. That is so important, and I thank our government for that. We need to do more, because we can't have these people living in hotel rooms for weeks and months and years. It just isn't sustainable, and it doesn't make any sense. People living on the third floor of a building with no elevator. They have a degenerative disease and can barely walk at all, and they could not get anyone to call them back. I've heard 2 accounts from 2 different people of horrendous treatment. I'm not going to repeat the words in this House of words that were spoken to them. People living in severe pain because they cannot afford to have the dental surgery they require, and no one will return their calls. People who would desperately like to go back to work, but the state of their front teeth is too embarrassing, and they need to get them replaced, and no one gets back to them. I had one constituent who was told, yes, you can have that surgery. COVID happened. When they tried to access it again, they were told they no longer qualified. They tried to find out several times why they were not, they were no longer able to get the service, and had to come to me, and actually did end up getting the service and qualifying for the service and getting it. But they shouldn't have to come to me to do that. We hear all the time of things changing for people and no one contacts them. I get the human condition. I get that people working within our systems are tired. They're burnt out because the very system in which they work are outdated. It's no one in here's fault right now. These are systems that are just historical, but we do have the responsibility to change that. These systems are full of assumptions, racism, and bias. We see some of that in this House, and that trickles down. We all need to do better. We must take a step back and consider what role we may play in a toxic culture. We are the leaders in this province, and that trickles down in very official ways. We need to take action and have action-taking space for people to take their complaints and concerns, and the people receiving these concerns must have a trauma-informed approach. We must support them so that they too don't burn out, because Islanders deserve respect and dignity, not blame and shame. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to rise to my feet and speak to this motion. I understand that there's a frustration with some Islanders trying to navigate some of the programs and through government. I hear about it. I give direction. I do what I can. But to blanket all the civil service as being part of a toxic culture, I just can't sit down. I have to stand up and say something about it. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to start off by moving a motion, and I would like to move an amendment to motion 14 as follows. After the first whereas clause, the following words will be inserted. And whereas isolated incidents do not reflect on the high professionalism of the PEI public service, and that the third, fourth, and fifth whereas clauses in the original motion be deleted. And this is seconded by the leader of the third party.
Honourable members, do you have copies?
I have copies available.
Thank you. Everyone got a copy? Speaking to the amendment?
Can I continue speaking on this, or?
Not the mover of the amendment. Not the mover. The honourable member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I said, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support a motion if it continues to include attacks on the public service and its professionalism, Mr. Speaker. I know as our Liberal caucus, we respect the public service and the value that their dedication provides a service to all Islanders from tip to tip, and they do it, Mr. Speaker, to the best of their abilities. And it is important that all members in this legislature respect and value the professionals of our public service, Mr. Speaker. We believe that the vast majority of our members of the public service do their job to the best of their abilities under all circumstances. We would ask for support from all the parties in this amendment so that it does demonstrate their support for the public service of Prince Edward Island. Mr. Speaker, as I said when I first stood up, I couldn't sit down and take the wordage that the opposition party had blanketed over the whole civil service across Prince Edward Island. I have civil servants, we all have civil servants that work or live in our districts, and they do a great job day in and day out. I know what kind of questions they field. I know, I get it. And sometimes they can have a bad day, but the vast majority of them, Mr. Speaker, are very professional. I know in Tignish at Access PEI, we have people there that make me so proud to be from the community. Senior citizens can come in, anyone can come in, whether they're newcomers. They will help them navigate through whatever programming they need. They go above and beyond to help these people. And I know that happens right across Prince Edward Island. Our nurses, the mover yesterday stood in the house and thanked the nurses and the staff in Summer Park over the weekend for how they were so made it so pleasurable for people to go there, and they were so happy and engaging and inviting. And then today to turn around and slap them, Mr. Speaker, I'm just amazed at what's going on in here. I can't understand it. And then to stand up and say that MLAs shouldn't be helping people, their constituents, navigate the system, again, that blows my mind. We've said it many times before. You talk about respect and dignity. Anybody that comes to me, if I can help them, I'll help them. I know I'm in one of the extremities. Well, I live in one of the extremities, Mr. Speaker, from Charlottetown. And Charlottetown is, obviously, where most government offices are. Most of my constituents come to me for anything government. And if I can give them direction, if I can give them help, that's my job, Mr. Speaker. That's what I do, and I take great pride in it. I know I can't phone on their behalf with social services. This confidential matters with health and such, but I put them to the people that can give them the best help and the best direction, Mr. Speaker. To say that the civil servants of Prince Edward Island are part of a toxic culture, I cannot believe that you have this on paper. You put this on paper, and you stood in the House and you read this. Get out in the real world. Get out and talk to your people. I don't understand this. It's absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy, Mr. And I'm insulted that they would do that. I have civil servants in my family too. My wife's a nurse. She goes home to home and does what she can. She gets abused many times. She's been abused over the years, where there's people who are Alzheimer's patients. They don't know what they're doing, but they'll reach out and they'll hit somebody. They'll say something. But you know what? She takes great pride. She understands what she does, and she doesn't have bad days. She has an understanding that these people have either an illness or a frustration, and she deals with it like a professional. I'm shaking the longer I'm up here, Mr. Speaker, because I cannot believe this motion came in the floor. To say a toxic culture. All civil servants across Prince Edward Island are part of a toxic culture. Mr. Speaker, I hope that every member in this House will support this amendment and delete what was written on a piece of paper that was passed around that they tried to push through this House, saying that civil servants on Prince Edward Island are part of a toxic culture. And I know they're going to stand up. The mover's going to stand up now and talk about, oh, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. It's black and white in print, Mr. Speaker. And I will not support their motion as written. And I ask people to support the amendment. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I certainly would like to support this amendment. And, you know, the word kindness has been floating around for a long time here, and this certainly isn't kindness. And, you know, to hit our public service with comments like this, and as the Honourable Member said, to put it in writing, I cannot believe it. Anyway, I certainly support this amendment. And while I can support the creation of an ombudsman's office, I can't go along with the motion's language, which attacks the public service. So let's get it cleaned up, make it constructive, and have more debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We can remove that language if it would make you more comfortable, but I can tell you one thing. As an MLA, I am certainly here for the people in my riding. That's why they contact me. As an MLA, it is not my job to get them into the services they deserve. There's phone calls, there's phone numbers there for that. That's why they're there. If they need help navigating those systems, if they need help getting them, of course we're there to help them. That's our job, literally. But I can't, and civil servants, I was one of them. And I can tell you, they contact me all the time because they're burnt out and they're asking for help and they don't know where to go. These are uncomfortable conversations. When we talk about toxic cultures, when we talk about racism, we talk about sexism, when we talk about misogyny, when we talk about rape, when we talk about rape culture, when we talk about all those things, we need to be uncomfortable. So I'm happy this made you uncomfortable. Because if, without feeling uncomfortable, these changes, these systemic level changes, these culture changes, as our Premier speaks about, will not happen without us getting uncomfortable. These conversations, you know, if this makes everybody happy, I'm happy to support the motion. It doesn't change what I said earlier, nor will it ever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I think it's incredibly important that we are able to have difficult conversations in this House. And when we are talking about toxic cultures, I think it's incredibly important that the member from Tignish Palmer Road understands that a toxic culture can exist, and it doesn't mean every single person in it is a bad person. I believe I have the floor. Do we believe that racism exists, Mr. Speaker? Of course we do. Does that mean every single person is racist? Of course not. But we have to be willing to deal with uncomfortable topics if we're ever going to be able to make changes. And I feel very sorry that the person who brought this amendment forward is trying to water down which is an incredibly important topic. Do I believe that our entire civil service is exhibiting a toxic culture? No. I also pointed out that I believe our civil service suffers from, in many cases, overburdened caseloads. I think that they find themselves dealing with untenable situations. You've also heard me say in my speaking notes that I believe the impacts of dealing with these things on a day in and day out basis is exhausting for people, Mr. Speaker. But the reality is the impacts on the individual, whether we're talking about racism, whether we're talking about sexism, whether we're talking about misogyny, the impacts of these are still there. And we have to, as a society, be prepared to have these discussions. We have to be prepared to do better on behalf of Islanders. I'm very concerned that when the mover of this amendment spoke, he said nothing of his concern for vulnerable Islanders. I heard him say nothing of his concern for the individuals. I have absolutely no problem with the, let me look at your amendment again, to include isolated incidences. I have no problem with that, but I disagree with striking the third, fourth, and fifth whereas. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to amend the amendment to withdraw and that the third, fourth, and fifth whereas clause in the original motion be deleted. I agree with the intent behind what the mover is bringing forward, but I see no merit in watering down a motion. If we are going to be able to deal with a toxic culture that exists in our world, we have to be prepared to have uncomfortable conversations. In no way is it a reflection on every individual person, but an acknowledgement of a systems-level problem that we need to be prepared to address. In the same way that we can't be afraid to speak up against racism, we can't be afraid to speak up against sexism, we can't be afraid to speak up against injustice when we see it and when we hear it. And I will look to my colleague from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke to second my amendment to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, do you have copies?
I do not. I didn't know this original amendment was coming, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to write it out.
We need copies.
No problem. The clerk to write it down. I didn't know the original amendment was coming, Mr. Speaker.
2-minute recess? 2 minutes, enough? Okay, honourable members. The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I definitely appreciate the support of the clerks in getting together a proper amendment to the amendment on this one. And I will just reiterate, I think it's incredibly important that the intent of the motion in which we deal with a toxic culture is left in. I reiterate again that I think it's impossible for us to deal with issues such as racism, sexism, misogyny, if we're not prepared to call them out when we see them. Of course, Mr. Speaker, this is not a reflection on every individual person, but a recognition that there are system-level issues that exist. We as a legislature have to be prepared to talk about them. I agree with the intent that the mover of the original amendment has when he wants to acknowledge that this does not reflect on the high professionalism of the public service as a whole. I definitely agree with that, and I'm happy to leave it in, but I believe that the other whereas clauses need to stay in place. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke, and the opposition whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am pleased to second this amendment to the amendment. I think it's quite important that we keep the language in this motion, particularly that references the important role of government as being leaders in creating a culture that is conducive not only to supporting those who come to the need to public services to get support and help, but also to protect and support the public servants themselves. The member from Tignish Palmer Road asked if we, requested that we listen to and that we speak with those public servants. And I wonder if he has done the same, because the public servants I have spoken with get into this job, get into that work because they want to make a difference, because they want to help. And so many are incredibly frustrated by the culture that exists within their workplaces, by the barriers and challenges in policy that they face when they want to help, and by the burden, the overburden of work that they are already facing in their workplaces, and that it makes it difficult for them to really engage with and do the job that they need to do. I'll tell just a little quick personal story. A couple years ago, my grandmother at one point needed some support to get access to funding to have her teeth removed and to get dentures. That had to be through social assistance, and that was during the time of the former Liberal government, of which, some of the people were members of in this legislature. And the policy at that time was that my grandmother had to go in and meet with a worker who my 85-year-old grandmother sat down, and this worker asked her to open her wallet and show that she didn't have any money in her wallet. And I said, why? And she said, well, the worker said, that is the policy. That is what I have to do. I don't want to do this, but it's what I have to do. It's a policy, and nobody listens when we say that this is a policy that isn't working. So that is one example, Mr. Speaker, where our public servants do not feel listened to, they are not empowered to do the job in the way they want to do it, and they are working within a culture that many times is not conducive to helping the people who need the help the most. So this is about leadership. It is about government recognizing that they are the leaders in creating a culture that will support positive workspaces and help those who are most in need. So we need to keep this language in this motion, because it is really the important issue here. It is the key to making change. It's recognizing that change happens at the top and needs to be spread to the rest of the organization, and it is government that must lead that change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive, speaking to the amendment as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it pleases me to rise to speak to this. And I fully support this, whereas isolated incidents do not reflect on the high professionalism of the PEI Public Service Amendment. When I was out campaigning, I bumped into several former public service workers who worked in the social development and social workers, and the topic was high burnout. It was someone that had been in that job for a long time, and she witnessed the turnover and high burnout rate, and it was mostly because the people could not find a way to use the system to help folks, and that the system was beating these public servants down itself. So whenever we talk about this, we have to keep in mind that this was a highly professional worker, public service worker. They recognize the issue. I have got many constituents that call me and talk about the issues they have with the system. It's systemic. It's not the public service. It's not the constituents. And it's not truly the MLA's job to provide access to these services. It point them in the right direction, certainly, but there should be a system in place that works for those constituents to begin with. And that's what this motion is about. So I need to rise and clarify that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to talk to the amendment. And I just want to say that change doesn't happen all the time with the stick, and that's what I feel like this motion is doing. There are some issues, obviously, but I think our public service works very hard. And over the last 15 years, I don't really speak too well in here all the time, but on the outside, I was lucky enough to be a motivational speaker and go and speak to most of the departments in our province. And yeah, we talk about it, and there's different problems and there's issues in there, but they're all good people. Okay, they all want to make a change. Okay, they're all working very hard. And a motion like this and an amendment like this wouldn't help them do that. Getting in there and talking to them, getting in there and understanding what the stresses are. My job is to keep this government to account, okay, and give it to them when they need it, not the civil servants. I have to be there to make sure that they understand that I support their work. I understand they're stressed out, and I'm going to do whatever I can to support them and keep people to account too as well. I'm not sure why we're talking about the word systemic so much and racism, and I don't know if that's an opportunity at this time, but I'm getting upset kind of hearing about that. They're kind of being mixed together, and I understand there's some problems there, and I understand we need to look at these issues, but in a motion like this, okay, at this time, okay, there's a lot of different problems, but we need to tone this down, and that's why I don't like using and seeing words like toxic culture. I don't like that in there. And you can talk about a lot of things, but that hurts people. Okay, if it's a toxic culture, the way I see about how you deal with that is you go in and talk about it. You go in and support, you go in and help, and you make the system better. When you're talking about being an MLA and the jobs of being an MLA and being, I heard some of the things we ask are ludicrous. I want the ludicrous stuff as an MLA. I don't want to be restricted by the things I'm supposed to do with numbers. I want to go. Recently, I had the minister out to one of the low-income housing units in my area, and a lady called me back and she said they won't clean my vents. It's not part of the thing. I need my vents cleaned. And I was on my way over with my own vacuum cleaner until a friend of mine said, don't do it because you might be in some liability issues, okay? I want that stuff. And I want to make those kind of good mistakes as an MLA. I will do everything and anything for my constituents. So I don't like a lot of this motion as it sits, so I will not be supporting this motion. I'll pass the floor for other people, but I just wanted a chance to say my words. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No. You just give the time back. Give the time to him.
I know, but do you just want me to adjourn? Do you want to call me and I'll adjourn debate?
Okay. The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to adjourn debate on this motion. Seconded by the Leader of the Official Opposition.
The honourable member from Cornwall, Middlebanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce a private member's bill. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Employment Standards Act, and I move, seconded by O'Leary and Verness, that the same now be received and read a first time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 101, an act to amend the Employment Standards Act, read a first time.
Honourable member, overview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is in regards to mental health and public service and allowing or ensuring employees of the public service that they have access to paid leave for mental illness within their family or themselves.
Thank you. The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
I beg to leave to introduce a bill to be entitled Bill number 102, Seniors Advocate Act. I move by the Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness that the same be now received and read a first time.
Shall carry.
Bill number 102, Seniors Advocate Act, read a first time.
Honourable Leader, overview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a brief overview. We have a Child Advocate Act. We have, we will have an ombudsman coming soon. It's time that we have an advocate for seniors to protect seniors in, navigating programs. Not everyone has family members here, and it's just something that we'd like to see done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, this is a bill, again, that has to do with the Legislative Management Committee, and we'll be sending this over to Legislative Management Committee also.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks, Third Party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to call on motion number 2, Mr. Speaker.
Shall it carry?
The Honourable Member for Cornwall Meadowbank moves, seconded by the Honourable Member for Charlottetown West Royalty, the following motion. Whereas many islanders and island families face challenges annually due to gambling addiction and a lack of supports for problem gamblers. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has only sought to exacerbate and increase the negative effects problem gambling can have on an individual and their families. And whereas the Government of Prince Edward Island has a duty to support and protect islanders experiencing addictions, no matter the nature of the addiction. And whereas the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development has heard from gambling addiction experts who indicated an expansion of online gambling services will only lead to an expansion of gambling addiction among islanders. And whereas government doesn't currently invest adequate resources into support programs for gambling addiction. And whereas government has given approval to an expansion of online gambling without conducting any consultation with islanders, public health, or addictions officials to explore potential risks of expanding online gambling services. Therefore be it resolved, the Legislative Assembly urge government to substantially increase the percentage of gambling profits that is reinvested into gambling addiction support programs. Therefore be it further resolved, the Legislative Assembly urge government to release an updated responsible gaming strategy within 6 months of this motion's passage. And therefore be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to reconsider the potential impacts their decision could have on islanders and conduct province-wide consultation prior to the implementation. And therefore be it further resolved that government delay the introduction of home gambling until this Assembly has had the opportunity to examine new addiction supports and to review an updated responsible gaming strategy.
The Honourable Member from Cornwall, Meadowbanks, the Third Party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gambling addiction not only affects the individual experiencing addiction, it can also have adverse effects on their family members and community. Approximately 950 islanders could be considered problem gamblers, according to experts. Gambling addiction was a concern prior to COVID-19 when only done in person. We now see a government moving to offer online gambling service in island homes, while many are either working or studying home due to the pandemic. Government moved to greenlight this expansion during a holiday cabinet meeting without having any discussions with islanders prior to doing so. We also heard there was no consultation with addictions officials despite potential risks. The online gambling model poses additional risk to islanders. Beyond allowing one to gamble from the comfort of their home, individual spins for virtual VLTs are often significantly higher than those in the physical location. Instead of recognizing the error in their ways, government has decided to double down their position. They insist they have no responsibility to consult with Islanders prior to this expansion of online gambling into Island homes. The only due diligence that appears to have been conducted by government was the Finance Minister receiving a briefing on 2 reports prepared by ALC. One could assume ALC has a vested financial interest in seeing this expansion occur. There are many more considerations beyond simply the financial and health impacts. The measure could impact both vulnerable and young Islanders, which is why the Minister of Social Development and Housing, as well as Education, have a role to play in the decision-making process. It's not too late for government to change course on their position. There have been many concerns expressed and little effort on government's part to address them. Government has a responsibility to protect vulnerable Islanders, and this decision doesn't achieve that goal. I call on government to recognize the potential harms this expansion of online gambling could create among Islanders and to conduct a province-wide consultations prior to rolling this out in Island homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's a pleasure to rise in support of this motion, and I think it's an important one. And as the chair of the Standing Committee, I heard the arguments, and it's pretty astonishing when we had our guest speaker in talking about this issue, David Hodgkins. And I'd also like to thank the Minister of Finance for coming in and speaking to this motion, or not to this motion, to the Standing Committee as well. We had a good discussion about it. I was surprised to see a few short lines about harm reduction in the speech from the throne, and this doesn't seem like something that propels harm reduction. It seems like something that we're looking at as a province. I understand the reasoning and the background behind the province, but oftentimes I'm hearing us use the word gaming instead of gambling, and this is gambling. This is gambling, and I understand a lot of the money now is going to other places, and I'm not sure what we do if this action is going to help that, and that's where I have a problem. And there's some contrast here too. I'm just going to read you something from the minister when she was in versus what David Hodgkins said. This is the argument. So Minister Compton said, the intention of the platform is not to create new players. It is to repatriate play from illegal for-profit entities in other countries back to the ALC responsible and regulated platforms, redirecting that revenue back to Prince Edward Island to fund important programs and services for Islanders. This reality is that many Islanders are playing these games now. And Dr. Hodgkins would argue that by saying, places that have offered online gambling locally, it doesn't recapture the market of the people who are gambling outside the jurisdiction completely. It provides new markets, new players. It increases the market and also provides those individuals with another source of gambling. Now, it may be safe source of gambling relative to some of the illegal sites, but it's another source of gambling. So for sure, there's that risk when 950 people who currently have gambling problems in Prince Edward Island, for that's too high. This problem will become more entrenched and more serious. So the arguments aren't adding up, and that's where we're talking as an island. That's why we're here to talk about this. And I just don't understand why we're moving down this road, and especially when this motion talks about what services are available. I asked for a simple $5,000 report that was issued last year to come back to the Standing Committee. I don't think we've received it yet. There's not a whole lot of funding there to support. There's a little bit of funding for some guidance and helpline that's underused, obviously, because gamblers aren't really necessarily coming out and reaching out for help all the time. It's a community that has to help that. And that 950 number just entails the gambler. It's not the families too, which are hurt by all this. The latest figures show that PEI made $18 million in gambling profits, $11 million of which came from VLTs. However, only $300,000 was spent on gambling addiction supports. That's not enough. This is dramatically underspent from where the government should be, according to experts, in gambling addiction. Government should not be further padding their profits on the backs of Islanders with gambling addictions. I'd like to read you, just recently in The Guardian, Don McLeod wrote in, and he sums it up very well, Mr. Speaker. Gambling, like smoking, drinking, drugs, is an addiction which ruins many families. Once you get hooked, you can't stop. You keep going and try to get back to what you lost. With almost 1,000 people with gambling problems on PEI, we should be trying to help them, not add more. It says in the paper someone has to lose in order for PEI to make money. And yes, it's more likely the low-income islanders. Minister Compton said it is no different than buying a lotto ticket. And then he goes on to say, come on, give your head a shake. Buying a lotto ticket is not the same as gambling one's paycheck and trying to win back the next one, only to have your families go without food and livelihood. I do hope the Premier is wiser and MLA see the damage this can be done as citizens don't have a say. So I wanted his words to be heard here and read into the record.
Honourable member?
Yeah.
We don't use members' names.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Apologies, yeah. Mistake. PEI is also without an updated responsible gaming strategy, something you think the government would have released prior to the large expansion on online gambling into island homes. It's important that if government remains insistent on ramming this online gambling through, that they put the supports and strategies in place to avoid increasing potential for harm to islanders and their families. I call on government to immediately increase the percentage of gambling profits spent on addiction support programs and to begin the process of drafting an updated responsible gambling strategy. I'd like to end it there, and I appreciate the time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable colleague mentioned, we did have an extensive discussion about the decision by the Executive Council to approve the expansion of online gambling in PEI. There were a couple of key things that we learned in the session with the representatives from government, including Minister. And some of those are really focused around the responsible gaming strategy, as mentioned by my colleague. What we learned was that the responsible gaming strategy sets out sort of some of the conditions around how government allocates funds, in this case the funds to go to harm reduction. But we also learned that the last time that responsible gaming strategy was updated was in 2008. In 2008, Mr. Speaker, VLTs were the #1 issue, and the primary purpose of that gaming strategy was to really put some conditions and limitations around VLTs in the province, as well as set some guidelines around the, at that time, new Red Shores Casino. In 2008, Mr. Speaker, people weren't using Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of the other social platforms that we know now that we spend way more than we should of our online time on. And that's where the bulk of this advertising, along with television, is happening to bring people to the online gaming space, Mr. Speaker. 2008 is a really long time ago. And I really agree with my colleague, who's the chair of the committee, that responsible gaming strategy, not having been updated to reflect our current realities and the impact of the online space, considering we're talking about online gambling, just seems to be a huge oversight by government that has been committed to and quite vociferous about consultation, about receiving input, and about accountability and transparency. I would point out that you can't, when you have a strategy in place, choose which bits of that strategy you want to use and ignore other parts. But unfortunately, that's what we've heard in the discussions around this gaming strategy, including the fact that the advisory board, which was meant to provide that outside of government consultation, including mental health professionals, was not actually ever even set up, let alone be in place. And therefore, there were no external consultations that we can find or that we can have shared around the impact of online gaming, which, as I said, in the strategy doesn't actually exist. The other piece around transparency and accountability, Mr. Speaker, that I think is really important to mention, is not necessarily as detailed in the motion, is the impact of the ALC reports that were being used by the Minister and Executive Council to make a decision to go ahead with this project, but which have not been shared with anyone outside Executive Council. In fact, we learned during that committee meeting that the Minister hadn't actually read the reports herself either, just the briefing note. Somebody's read them, but we don't know who. Without access to the reports that inform a really important decision like this, we have no way of knowing what the criteria or conditions were to make such an important and impactful decision to implement what is not just another revenue stream, simple as that may seem. And you know, we know that there is revenue is absolutely a huge piece of the decision to go ahead with this project. We all know that government is under pressure to find revenues where revenues are missing. But revenues that are earned on the back of vulnerable islanders, of people who are subject to addictions, when we have a very clear and consistent statement from this government and from the Premier in particular that mental health and addictions is the #1 problem and the #1 priority. It is absolutely impossible to understand how you can hold that commitment to the health of islanders and a commitment to what is relatively small revenue line and say that these two things deserve equal weight. I would hope that there would be more fulsome discussions in Executive Council, but we won't ever know. And it is government's right to make those decisions without any input at all from the legislature. But in this case, we can't then have conversations about how we take care of the islanders who are vulnerable in our society when we don't have a strategy in place that says that this is even a problem, when we don't have a strategy in place that identifies that online gambling is even a thing and therefore no data that kind of connects to it, when we have a government disputing the data that's presented by experts in the field who say that they feel that this will increase the number of problem gamblers in PEI, that those gamblers will need additional supports that we're not ready to provide for them, and that this will disproportionately impact islanders who are not currently gambling online by the attraction to bring them into a space because they think that it's safe for them, because it's coming from a trusted source. It's coming from ALC with their happy commercials of bouncing balls and people with big checks. ALC are not a trusted partner for somebody who has an addiction problem. They are your worst nightmare when you have an addiction problem. And we have to be able to sort of recognize that when we make decisions about things, they are not made in isolation. We can't make a decision about this is a really good thing and we're going to miss it. We're going to miss that $1 million. We're going to miss being at the table when we also want to say that we want to take care of those hundreds, if not thousands, of islanders who are really struggling. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to amend the motion. I think we've probably had enough of that today, but I would like to sort of speak, you're welcome, but I would like to speak in strong support of this motion, and particularly from the aspect of the motion that speaks to the importance of redoing that responsible gaming strategy as a priority and holding on to moving ahead with this project until we have more information, more input, and a better and more transparent set of information to make the decision on in what is the best interest of all islanders, Mr. Speaker, because all islanders matter. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm once again quite happy to discuss or to respond to the motion that has come to the floor, and I will reiterate a number of the things I said during committee, which I was more than happy to attend. We can't forget that over $100 million is leaving Atlantic Canada every year to offshore illegal and unregulated sites. What we're trying to do here is not something new. Other jurisdictions across the country have been doing it for as long as 10 years. And the studies shown across the jurisdictions are that gambling has not increased. And if we look just as closely and as recently as New Brunswick, who launched in August, the average bet was under $2. So this is not something new. This is, and I agree with the honourable member, things have changed over the last 10 years and even 5 years. And if you asked me 5 years ago, would I be going online to purchase my groceries and do all those other things that we are now doing online, I would say no. But we are, and we've learned through COVID that people are on their computers more, and that would include gambling. I will say gambling. I mean, gaming, gambling, whatever we want to call it, we can split hairs. here, but this activity is occurring whether we like it or not. We cannot close the borders at the bridge with this. And we, as government, feel it's a responsibility to provide safe, regulated gaming options through ALC. And ALC is a Crown corporation here for all 4 Atlantic provinces. And let's not forget the money that is earned or recouped through ALC comes back to the Atlantic provinces to provide the services that Islanders need and expect, and that includes addiction services. I agree with the member that we can do more. It is our duty to support Islanders, and that is why I've asked my staff to begin work on updating the responsible gaming strategy. But let's not forget, not everyone who goes to the liquor store is an alcoholic. Not everyone who goes to the cannabis store is hooked on drugs. And not everyone who goes online for gaming is an addict for gambling. People are doing this for entertainment. We want to provide a safe, regulated site for all Islanders, and the only way to do that is through ALC, and to ensure that all of the proactive things that are put in place through ALC, whether it's time limits, it's betting limits, it's the delay in increasing your betting limits, those are all very, very impactful actions that can be taken to ensure people are playing responsibly. The new online gaming strategy will look at what kind of impact these original measures had and determine how we, as government, can do more. And we know we can do more. We'll also examine funding levels for addiction supports and look at potential increases. We will work through the Department of Health and Wellness to determine what additional harm mitigation measures might be needed after launching online casino games. And I'll remind you, we're still in early days of this. We have not decided, we have not flicked the switch. I'd like to remind members of the House that these games are currently not available in PEI. As opposed to all of the hearsay and then the Twitter comments or whatever is out there. These games are not available on PEI right now, except through illegal, unregulated gaming sites that are mostly housed offshore, if not all housed offshore. And we are not recouping any of those dollars. And we can bury our heads in the sand and say, this is not happening, and if we don't have an ALC site, it won't happen. That's not so. It's just not so. Mr. Speaker, the danger of these unregulated offshore sites is of a great concern to myself and to this government. We need to take action to provide a safe, regulated alternative to those who participate in these activities, and so they can do so in a responsible way. A regulated offering through provincial lottery corporations is already available in nearly all Canadian provinces. With New Brunswick and Nova Scotia signing on, because they're in the midst of this too, over 95% of Canadians have the option of gambling legally at a provincial regulated site online. So, Mr. Speaker, this is nothing new. It's not a new platform. It's something that has been there for a long time, but it is a platform that it's another game that we can opt into through ALC. Having said that, mental health and addictions remain very important priorities to this government, and that is one reason why we are looking at this. We think it's very important that Islanders have a safe place to play. And we'll work to support Islanders who struggle with addictions. A variety of different group supports and one-on-one counseling with gambling specialists is available through phone, in person, and online now. Walk-in services through Addiction Services are available to all Islanders who wish to speak with an addictions counselor for up to 1 hour on a first-come, first-served basis. Gambling clients can also participate in a 21-day transition program that offers counseling and group therapy sessions to recovering addicts. In addition to these, there are many apps and online programs that can be beneficial to anyone struggling with mental health and addictions, as well as their family and friends. And to name just a few, the ICANN Anxiety Program, the Mindfulness Program, and our new Bridge the Gap app. However, by not allowing online gaming to go ahead in this province, we are potentially placing Islanders at a greater risk of not giving them access to a safer, regulated alternative, which has responsible gambling supports available. I'm confident in the supports we have in place, and will continue to examine them as a government to determine what we can provide, where we can provide enhanced services for those who need them. Mr. Speaker, the focus of this government is to provide a safe gaming site for Islanders, and this is one way to do it. And we will also work with health and wellness to ensure that if extra and when extra funds are needed to provide gambling addiction services to Islanders, that they will be there. And we're more than willing to work with across government to provide a safe place for Islanders to go online and access this service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise this afternoon and speak to this very important motion. As 2020 was coming to close and many Islanders were busy with holiday season activities, we heard that government had made a decision to greenlight an online gaming expansion. This was confusing to many Islanders as there had been no discussion surrounding this issue to the lead-up of the decision. In the days and weeks that followed, government has unfortunately decided to double down on their decision. We heard the Minister of Finance and ALC representatives pass around who has the responsibility to conduct consultation, and the result so far has simply been no consultation. Government's entire due diligence regarding potential harm to Islanders seems to be a ministerial briefing on 2 reports commissioned by ALC, who I might add has a vested financial interest in seeking this expansion occur. In a standing committee just a few weeks ago, we learned just how unprepared government was for this expansion. Addiction officials received no consultation and played no role in the decision. Gambling addiction experts have also said this will both create new problem gamblers and worsen the addiction of existing gamblers. Now government has used the rationale that this is entirely for the purpose of repatriating gamblers from illegal sites, which they currently use. While that may be how government looks to justify the decision, even members of their own party have expressed concerns for what this would mean to existing problem gamblers. Even if government wishes to go down this road, we don't currently have the proper supports in place to support those with gambling addictions as well as their families. Gambling addiction experts indicate 30 to 50% of gambling revenue should be returned in support of gambling programs. Latest figures show PEI's gambling revenue at $18 million, but only $300,000 goes to supports. Pretty small amount. I was pleased to see the Premier indicate following the first question period that he was open to increasing gambling addiction supports in light of this information. It is my hope that gambling addiction supports will be substantially increased to reflect the advice of experts. However, I still think there is more fulsome conversation required on this issue. Many Islanders have expressed discomfort with online casino expansion into their homes, particularly in the middle of a pandemic when many are working and learning from home. This is precisely why we must conduct a province-wide consultation process. I cannot understand why government so far has been restrained to do so. There is no push behind this decision, which is why many Islanders cannot understand why government would not press pause to reconsider potential repercussions. While I don't think the government has bad intentions when authorizing this expansion, there's one unwillingness to push pause to consider the repercussions concerning. It is important that the stubbornness and unwillingness to be wrong is not the driving factor behind this. As I have said, I am willing to give government the benefit of the doubt for now that they aren't putting profit over people. However, if we don't immediately increase gambling supports while conducting province-wide consultations on this decision, many Islanders will begin questioning government's intentions and decisions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And, it's a pleasure to rise today to speak to this motion. And I want to start off by saying that I'm always supportive of good decisions in government, good individual decisions that you make, collective decisions that we make as a society. And good decisions are based on a couple of very universal things, good evidence, and proper consultation. And I'm concerned that on both of those counts, the decision made by government and the purpose of this motion, which is, at least to a certain extent, to rectify and mitigate that decision, has not been made on good evidence, and it certainly hasn't been made with any consultation. Good evidence comes from good studies. The leader of the third party just cited the 2 studies that ALC has put forward to the government in support of this expansion of online gaming into our province. We haven't seen those reports, of course, and it's going to be dependent on the other provinces who are part of ALC, the Atlantic provinces, to give their blessing to those reports actually being released. So whether we will ever actually see those reports or not is a matter of doubt. As far as we know, that's the only evidence that government has used to support this decision. A large study was just released in Britain, and by large, I mean, and by the way, the quality of studies is always up for debate, and oftentimes we will hear both scientists and politicians or people supporting their position by talking about studies. And it's important that we recognize that all studies are not created equal, and the information that one gets from studies is absolutely not equal. But this is a study done on 6.5 million people. In the UK, that represents about 10% of the population. And it was done with anonymized data from UK bank accounts from those people. And it found that about 40% of those people gambled. And that's across the spectrum. That's somebody who would do it recreationally, somebody who does it habitually, somebody who is a gambling addict. And what they looked at were the financial, the social, and the health outcomes on those individuals. And they found that the outcomes were disproportionately bad for those who gambled over a period of a number of years. They found, and I'm going to quote from the study, we found that people who gamble, even if it is with a relatively small amount of their monthly budget, experience an increase in distressing financial outcomes, such as falling behind on their bills and mortgage, or using a payday loan, and those then they use that more than those who don't. The risk increases with higher rates of gambling. Now, this is a very recent study done by people from the University of Oxford, and while they also state that there's much that we don't know about the impacts of gambling, and that's absolutely true. It's the biggest study, at least as far as I'm aware, that has ever been done on, and it's not problem gambling, but the incidence of gambling in a society and the impacts that it has on the well-being of that society. And again, I want to go back, not just financial well-being, but social and health. And one of the motions that was presented in this House a couple of years ago by the now official opposition was a motion on health in all policies. And the purpose of that motion was to encourage governments to look at decisions, not strictly, in this case, this is the immediate effect of this will be an increase in revenues for the province. It's estimated $750,000 in the first year, increasing to over $1 million after a couple of years. That's one impact of this, but there are other impacts. And unless we look at the other impacts that occur because of any particular policy, here we're talking about the establishment of an online casino, but we could look at any other policy that you like in government. If we don't look at it through a health lens, we may be creating costs, and well, first of all, there may be human costs involved in that, but there may be literal costs for government that might overshadow the financial benefits that come to the provincial treasury. So I would encourage government, if we are going to go ahead with this, and I'm relieved, and it's the second time I've heard the Minister of Finance say this, that we're in the early days here and no decision has been made, no button has been pressed to go ahead with this. But I really encourage government to look at this not strictly through a financial lens, but look at it through a health in all policies lens. Read this large study recently out of Britain. Understand that gambling has impacts on individuals, it has impacts on families, it has impacts on communities, it has impacts on our entire province. So let's make an evidence-based decision here. And let's weigh, because nobody in here is suggesting that there are not negative consequences to gambling. We all understand and recognize that. The question here is whether government should do something that they are able to do. Absolutely, government can do this. They could join New Brunswick after 10 years of lobbying from ALC to establish one of these online casinos, failed lobbying for 10 years. We could join New Brunswick and create an online casino here in Prince Edward Island. But we don't have to do that. And we need to look at all aspects of this. We need to be absolutely clear that in terms of the overall benefits to Prince Edward Island, this is a good thing. I don't know whether that's true or not. And neither does the Finance Minister. And neither does the Cabinet. And until we have that full evidence, we will not know whether this is a good idea or not for Prince Edward Island. As I said, ALC has been lobbying for this in the Atlantic region for 10 years. And they have a lot of money to lobby with. It happens to be our money. But they spend a huge amount of money on advertising. I don't know if this is true for the rest of you in this House, but I've noticed a huge uptick in the presence of ALC. Maybe it's because I'm talking about ALC with my phone sitting next to me all the time. But I've seen an enormous uptick in my social media feeds of ALC ads. And these are not cheap ads. There's a lot of money goes into this. And the honourable member from Mermaid Stratford, in the committee meeting that my colleague referenced earlier, talked about the $20 Kickstart gift, which was originally offered to people to come onto this site. Now, it doesn't exist here, of course, as yet, but the $20 was there to encourage people to start gambling, or perhaps to come back to gambling. And that's perhaps, for me, the most insidious part of this. That we're not just talking about repatriating existing gamblers. And indeed, the establishment of a regulated, and I put in inverted commas, safe online casino here on Prince Edward Island is not going to make those other options go away. They are still there. It's not going to stop people who are already on those sites from doing it. But if we have an institution, ALC, establishing a new online site with the credibility that a government gives it, offering islanders, and many of those islanders will be reformed, recovering gambling addicts, opportunities to come back, I can only imagine that we are going to create new gamblers, and we're going to encourage those who have perhaps been away from gambling for a long time to come back and do something that is destructive not only to their own lives, but to their families and to our communities. So again, just because government can do this, should we do it? And we need to ask that question very seriously, and we need to do it with all of the information that we can get. There are some particular concerns about online gambling. And again, my colleague earlier cited the letter recently in The Guardian, where the writer talks about how going to pay a couple of bucks for a scratch ticket in your local convenience store is in no way analogous to sitting at home in the middle of the night, alone, with a credit card and no restrictions, and being able to gamble away not just the money that you have in your bank account, but far more than that. And it's that lack of controls, that lack of regulation that really concerns me. I spoke to somebody who's not a recovering gambling addict, but a recovering addict the other day. It was quite a while ago, actually. And he said, unless you've been an addict, you can't understand what it's like. And he said it's like having your head held underwater, and you cannot take a breath, and you will do literally anything to get your next breath. And that image has really stuck with me. That desperation, that loss of control, that willingness to do anything in order to, of course, he was using the analogy of your next breath, but it was for him the next drink, or for the person who's gambling, the next opportunity to go online and spend money. And to think that a little pop-up saying you have to, your hour is up, it's time to stop, or or some sort of self-regulated mechanism is going to stop people for whom that is their reality. That's what gambling is to them. It's not recreational. It's not something that they do for fun. It's an addiction. And to imagine that an online regulated gambling site is somehow safe for them is sadly misguided. This motion talks about a number of options and things to do in order to create a safer environment. The first one is to increase the percentage of gambling profits that are to be reinvested in gambling addiction supports. And of course, probably goes without saying, Mr. Speaker, that I speak strongly in favour of this motion and all aspects, all of the operative clauses. When the expert was here talking to the Standing Committee, we heard that 1.5% of gambling revenues are reinvested, if you can use that word, in creating supports for problem gamblers. And I asked, well, where did that number come from? Where did the study that suggests that 1.5% is the appropriate amount? And that there is no rationale for that. It's a number that the ALC has used, or that, I'm sorry, it's not ALC, this is a provincial government decision, that they have used for decades now. They've never reviewed that. They've never gone out to find out whether other jurisdictions used more or perhaps even less than that. I do know that other jurisdictions use more than that. Manitoba, for example, uses between 4 and 5%, 3 times what we use here. So I think we need to review so many things about this. I was glad to hear the Minister say, and this is one of the other operative clauses, that we are going to update the responsible gambling strategy. And I hope that does happen, as the motion suggests, within 6 months of this motion's passage, assuming that we do pass this in the House. But that's one of many things that needs to be looked at. Of course, government collects taxes from all kinds of places, from alcohol, from tobacco, and from gambling. And as, again, my honourable colleague has already said, the figures here are on Prince Edward Island from ALC. Our share of that is about 18.9 million, I think, last year, of which a large portion is VLTs. Now, I'll get to VLTs in a minute. But in the other so-called sin taxes of tobacco and alcohol, I wish I had the figures in front of me, and I should have had them before I stood up to speak. It's my understanding that a much larger percentage of the taxation revenue that comes from alcohol and tobacco is put back into support programs. I stand to be corrected on that, but I suspect that that is indeed the case. So if we're not spending enough to create supports for problem gamblers, then we need to do something about that. Again, I'm just asking the question. I don't know. I'm not government. I'm not forced to make this decision. But I'm hoping that government will look at all of the evidence out there to make a good decision. VLTs are in a class of their own when it comes to addiction potential. People gamble in all kinds of different ways, but VLTs have been consistently shown to be the most addictive, the most problematic way that one can gamble. And it's because they can be programmed in such a way that creates the illusion that even though you're losing, you're going to win very, very soon. You're so close to winning that the compulsion is to carry on. And one of the 2 strongest recommendations from the responsible gaming strategy from some time back was to drastically reduce the amount of VLTs, because they were seen quite clearly to be, again, the phrase that's often used is the crack cocaine of gambling, to remove a vast number of those VLTs and also the places in which they are kept. And to a certain extent that happened. That happened under the former Liberal government. And many of those VLTs were removed, but they're still there. But online gambling is entirely like that. It's all electronic. It can all be built in such a way that it hooks people in at the highest level of that addictive potential, and is a much more difficult thing to deal with. So I think when we're talking about online gambling and the creation of an online casino here, we have to understand that this is not just a new type of gambling scratch ticket. This is not GeoSweep, another failure of the previous Liberal government, but this is something quite different. This is another layer, another level of addictive potential, and we need to recognize that and tread terribly carefully. And of course, there's a certain amount of irony here that in the third party they have a motion here expressing consternation and concern about online gambling, where for many years, and those who now sit in the government benches, of course, when they were in opposition, howled in indignation at the attempted establishment of another online gaming scheme here of a much larger magnitude. And I know there were some concerns expressed on the government side when any sort of parallel was drawn between e-gaming and this online casino, that was ridiculous. How could you do that? But they were both online gambling platforms, and I think it's ironic. I'm very glad that the third party is now coming forward to express their concerns about this, but the irony is not lost on me. So I'm very happy to stand up in support of this motion. I truly hope that government does the consultation that we know has to be done. And I hope we make a good decision. I hope we weigh all of these things. And I thank the third party for bringing forward this motion, and I hope that it receives unanimous consent in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness, third party whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not giving myself much time here to speak on this particular motion, Mr. Speaker, and I guess somebody can nod to me if he's wanted to go to a vote or not, but I wanted to take a different approach to the whole concept of this debate here, and I want to talk a little bit about the impacts that this procedure would have on our legions, our Lions clubs, our harness racing industry, as this will, in my opinion, be a competition to have those for any of those gambling dollars that are out there, Mr. Speaker. And although I'm very supportive of this particular motion to make sure that we have the processes in place to deal with people with addictions, I wanted to add a little bit to the conversation here. Myself, I'm not a gambler myself, but I do buy a 50-50 ticket that you go to a function. I did win a ticket on a horse, Mr. Speaker, and get into the harness racing industry. And I'll almost say that every one of us that are MLAs are probably gamblers in our own right, because we put our name on a ballot and it's hit and miss whether we're going to have success in keeping work up to a certain degree, Mr. Speaker. But I think, that's a different component of things in the respect that the harness racing industry, you meet the public. I had the great opportunity to meet the Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier really through harness racing. There's a wonderful fraternity within the harness racing industry, Mr. Speaker. I have concerns that allowing people to gamble online, and yes, I hear the arguments that you can do that right now on offshore sites, but I think that's something that maybe we should be putting our emphasis on. How do we stop that on Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker, versus trying to allocate it to be easier? And, those are the things that we need to try to do. We've passed legislation. We've done many different things to prevent people from doing certain things, Mr. Speaker. But I think we need to put more emphasis in on that, Mr. Speaker. But as I see, once again, the time has come. I'm going to adjourn debate on this, Mr. Speaker. Seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, honourable member. The honourable member from Morel, Donut. The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Speaker.
Not yet.
Orders.
Careful what you wish for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that the first order of the day be now read.
Shall I carry?
Carry. Order number 1, adjourn debate on the draft address. Debate was adjourned by the honourable member from O'Leary Inverness.
The honourable member from O'Leary Inverness, the third-party witness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seem to be always hitting this 4 o'clock time zone, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to my discussions.
5 o'clock.
So, thanks. But I did want to just barely kind of get started last time on my address to the throne speech, and I'll slightly encapsulate a little bit of what I said earlier on, just for those watchers that are, tuning in to want to hear the member for O'Leary Inverness give his points of view regarding this. I would call it somewhat of a snoozer debate of 22 pages of a document, but still, I did make that statement, and I did say that, it was. The words do matter, and I am going to reflect a little bit on the words that here and that. And I did also encapsulate, I want to commend the member for Charlottetown-Winslow for his opportunity to be the mover of the throne speech. And that's always quite an honor as an MLA, so I did commend him on that. Then I started talking a little bit about, on page 6, which was where I just get started, was on the whole issue around healthcare. And I did have some concerns about the wording in the respect that says that from the perspective of patients, assessing the system for certain services complex and time-consuming, and too many resources appear to be spent on acute care. And I do have concerns on that, if that's something that is code for cuts to our acute care services, Mr. Speaker. I'm not saying for a moment that the government doesn't have the authority as Minister of Health to deal with some of the changes in health care, Mr. Speaker. I don't mind if there's something that happens in my own hospital, Mr. Speaker, but I want to make sure that we're not reverting backwards and we're providing more services. I can remember a document, a throne speech, that was previously issued by this particular government, and they talked about adding oncology services, I recall, to some of our rural hospitals, Mr. Speaker. As of yet, I've not seen anything of that nature in my hospital. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, did you see any in yours? Probably not. So, once again, I always go with a bit of bated breath when it comes to things that are in the throne speech, whether they're real or not. And once again, budgets and time will sort of reveal these realities to what goes on. Mr. Speaker, and then I'll now start where I left off last time. But the focus on acute care and long-term care is something that, that is important. We have seen issues. I can see many acute care beds, some in the hospital that I represent, as well as other facilities, where we do have too many people awaiting long-term care, sitting in our hospital beds. And I get many calls from constituents saying, "Mom's in a hospital bed. She does not get the level of services that's required, Mr. Speaker. She's not getting the enhancements of life." And it's important that, we try to work that. I know when I was minister, we did try to do some of those things where we could allow those patients to get out to organizations in long-term care, go to their community events and things of that nature to try to help in that regard, Mr. Speaker. But I think the reality is that we still need long-term care beds in Prince Edward Island. We've seen the government make announcements. Our government had made announcements, but we can't get them open, Mr. Speaker. We can't find the staff to allow these facilities. We've seen it in Les Chenaux, where they've got 12 beds ready to go, and then all of a sudden can't find any nurses to fulfill that. So that's a challenge that government has to take on. It has to address those issues in making sure we have the proper number of long-term care beds in this province, but yet not take away from our acute care services, Mr. Speaker. Those services are still needed, and we do need those services in our local communities in making sure that we're doing the specialty services that we're delivering. I know in O'Leary, I said before, we focus on restorative care, convalescent care, and palliative care, Mr. Speaker. That's our area of expertise. That's what we do good. We need to get our patients into hospitals where they get their surgeries, and as quickly as we can, get them out of those more expensive beds and put them into our community care hospitals and making sure that they are getting that convalescent care that can get them back home and back being productive in our community, Mr. Speaker. I started to talk a little bit about, in our time, we'd made some decisions in government where we created these health centers, was the term we used, Mr. Speaker. And I know in O'Leary, we talk about, we put a nice health center, we put some long-term care beds, and we have acute care beds, and we have home care and supports based out of there. And then just up the road, we have Island EMS has a depot, and then we've also added ambulatory care nursing at that hospital, and that center provides a lot of healthcare services. Then all of a sudden this government gets elected and they come in and they start talking about hubs. We're going to have these healthcare hubs. And I've been trying here many times to get some information. What's that hub? What's that actually do, Mr. Speaker? Can you define hub? Well, the previous minister, he had lots of different versions. Is that going to be a hub in Crapo? Is Olaria a hub? What are they? Couldn't get many answers. Now, all of a sudden, in this throne speech, Mr. Speaker, they're called homes, medical homes and medical neighborhoods. And, so that's a new term. Hadn't seen that one before. What does that mean? I see, in the tendering process, there's an RFP out for, looks like some sort of a medical home in Alberton. But, I looked a little bit over the RFP. I couldn't get a lot of clarity. It seems to be some sort of a long-term care facility. It seems like an apartments and a little bit of health care, I guess, Mr. Speaker. That doesn't give me a lot of clarity. Is that the type of, what type of services are there? And how does that replace what services we already have, Mr. Speaker? What impacts will that have on the existing services there? Is this a dilution? Is it going to be staff are concerned, but I do also see on that tendering process, Mr. Speaker, it's not even going to be open until 2025. Oh. So it's going to take some time there to get this process underway. So it leaves a lot to the imagination, Mr. Speaker, to what these medical homes in the hood is going to look like, Mr. Speaker. So, I kind of question that a little bit. It says change won't happen overnight. That's correct. I was Minister of Health for 2 years, and it does take some time. I was Minister of Agriculture for a little over a year. It takes time, and I commend the ministers working on some of the things that we started to work on. Those are good things. But I don't want our healthcare services going from bad to worse, no different from going from hubs to homes. I want this to at least, let's try to improve the situation, Mr. Speaker. When I looked at some of these, they're talking about three homes they're looking for health care, Mr. Speaker. And then I go to the patient registry. It doesn't take much to figure out there's at least 2,000 people that should be on the patient registry. That's probably about 7,000 people per home. Well, 7,000 people, that would be one of the larger medical practices in the province, Mr. Speaker. So, once again, is that realistic? Does it meet the needs? Is it where we need to be to deliver healthcare services to possibly 20,000 people? And that number is growing. I've mentioned here before, Mr. Speaker, it's like a doomsday ticker clock. It just keeps going up, and the numbers, we never stop. It's like, well, it's probably 20,000 people on the patient registry. I think there's about 16,000, something like that. And then there's Dr. Crothers's patient list is not on there. And that was a decision the government made. My understanding is that you try to hold a panel size together for about 6 months to allow that transition from one medical practitioner to another. Allows to deal with nurse practitioners. So there's a lot of things that go with that. But we generally know those names are people without a family doctor right today, Mr. Speaker. I know the Premier talked about, I think it was a practice in the Montague area that has about 10,000 patients, and that is a doctor that hires their own nurse practitioners. And yes, under a fee-for-service practice, that is permissible. You can, any doctor can take on as many patients as they want, and if they have the medical supports there to do that and provide the level of service, that can work. But we have to make sure that we still have to provide a level of service to the patient, Mr. Speaker. Very important. The patient has to be a priority here, Mr. Speaker. We talk about in the throne speech more virtual care options in circumstances where a physical visit may not be necessary. I know when I was Minister of Health, we brought in the concept of mental health services by Skype and virtual services in that regard. And I was criticized immensely for doing that. But I would argue in that particular case, Mr. Speaker, we were trying to, it's something that you can communicate one-on-one with a patient. There's not a lot of poking, prodding. You don't have to pry. You don't have to, it's just a conversation in general terms, Mr. Speaker. But as you expand upon that, sometimes when people need to see a family doctor or a medical practitioner and they don't know what's wrong with them, Mr. Speaker, it usually takes some poke and prod, and there has to be some maybe looking at a patient and things of that nature. So I sort of have concerns of how far we go with that, Mr. Speaker. I certainly see one medical practitioner working with another medical practitioner using some communication lines with the virtual technology. That certainly can make some sense. But I think that's something that we have to be careful of. And I would also say that I think it's important that we make sure that a good, fulsome discussion goes with our medical practitioners in this and our healthcare professionals, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the issue of liability. Liability will be something that the minister that represents Albert and Bloomfield will hear much in the conversation on any of these dealings with healthcare services, Mr. Speaker. Medical practitioners need to know that they're not going to always be held liable. If there's mistakes that occur, if there's things that happen, you are, subjective to the possibilities of liability. Many times the different portfolios I've had as minister, it's not uncommon to get calls that there's a potential liability risk with this particular procedure, this particular facility, the list goes on. You're constantly being challenged by people to take litigation against either the minister or the medical practitioners. We always have to be mindful. We have to protect our medical practitioners in this stuff, Mr. Speaker, and we also have to protect the taxpayer. We can't take on undue liability for taking risks that are unnecessary when it comes to the delivery of health care, Mr. Speaker. So these are the types of things that are very important to be part of the equation, part of the decision-making when it comes to a government that has to put together a throne speech to the delivery of health care and the budget that goes with that, Mr. Speaker. This is not, we're not at Star Trek here where Kirk and Bones do some scan over somebody and figure out what's wrong with them and check out their diagnosis, Mr. Speaker. This is not a B-rated sci-fi movie running government. It's a tough business. And we have to make sure that we're getting this right in our goals, of which I recommend. I think it's a great lofty goal. A sustainable, inclusive, and innovative healthcare system. That's what we want. I commend the government for the statement. Now let's make the words reality. Let's make sure that the words have meaning, and just because you say it doesn't make it so. So we have to, and that's my role as a critic, to make sure that I'm holding government to account to make sure that it is so, the words that they say. Now I see, another comment that is made about eventually getting into an integrated electronic medical record system. I commend government. I commend the minister if he can make this happen. I see they've awarded TELUS Medical the contract to deliver that. I've seen numerous in my past. We've had a number, even myself. We started out an electronic medical record system. This government canceled it. Now their argument was that it wasn't a good enough system. Maybe, well, maybe it wasn't the right system, but we did make the attempt to try that. Now you're going to try the same thing again. Now let's see what they come up with, and to see if it's going to be a system that will work. Like I said, I hope it's successful. It is a key impediment to our ability to attract physicians here in this province. And it's hopefully time. I mean, I'd advocated many times when I was minister on it, but it is an expensive ticket item. It's a big ticket item, and it's something that we have to do. Now, the member from Charlottetown-Winslow said that UPI will be doubling the nursing seats. Lofty goal again. Now, I had my time when I was minister, we talked about how do we increase the seats. That comes with a very big ticket item, and that's a big expensive item, because it's not only a matter of just saying you're doubling the seats, you also have to have double the professors, you have to have double the space, the lab space, the list goes on. You have to the preceptors that are allowed to train these people. Certainly in my time, that was seemingly a very lofty goal that probably was going to be a challenge. And then the other issue is, although we have a high number of vacancies that are nursing professions right now, how many is too many, how many is not enough? Those are tough decisions. I readily acknowledge the challenge that government has in trying to do that. But if we're saying we're doubling them, let's see that it be doubled. Let's see in a few more years if we get double the seats there, double the nursing, because we definitely have a serious issue when it comes to our healthcare professionals, our nursing shortages, our LPNs, all of those situations are, there's vacancies. I go on the government website every week and check the numbers. I think this week it was 60-some vacancies in the nursing profession on the government website. Not talking other sites that are out there. Glacier News looking for, well, you know, these are I've seen it up as high into the 70s. And you know, I know in my time as minister, I always sort of, the number out here was 2020. There'll be 20 internal vacancies, 20 external vacancies, because it's a pretty good guess that if it's an internal vacancy, it's eventually going to go external. Now it's in the 60s range, Mr. Speaker. That's a challenge. And if you don't have the people to back up the system, like I've talked to people in the healthcare system, and there's numerous situations, they are right at the cusp of an overcapacity protocol where they don't have the staff to deliver the services. And yes, government can make the decision, the minister can make the decision to go into those overcapacity situations, but there's the liability issue comes up, Mr. Speaker. You know yourself, those are the challenges. And you can do that for a few times, but eventually it's going to be, it's a tough day for the minister to have to deal with those situations. And, you know, so I commend them for making those efforts, but you know, I just hear that if one person didn't show up for their shift because of sickness, because of COVID issues, or whatever the place might be, the staff is in a massive turmoil in trying to provide that services. And we run into it here just the other day when we went to this modified code red, and we had all these, the people at all these sites that were exposure sites, and people were calling in and saying, you know, I'm in an exposure site, what should I do? Should I come to work? Should I not come to work? Putting people in a tough situation, putting nurse managers, putting our facility managers in tough situations, Mr. Speaker. We got through it, but it wouldn't have taken much for a couple of more exposure sites, for a couple of more staff to be in a situation because of the shortages that we have, Mr. Speaker. It's concerning, and it's a big challenge, and I'm hopeful that this document will be the key to start to see some of those results, and we'll hold government to account to try to do that. You know, we talk here a little bit about a 5-year, $10 million Community Health and Wellness Addictions Fund. Well, that's $2 million a year. And when you get into things of mental health issues, psychiatrists, things of that nature, $2 million doesn't go too far. So I hope that this is enough. We heard a very passionate speech by the seconder of this particular motion, Mr. Speaker, the throne speech, and we know that there are major issues out there. We all have many crosses to bear. Islanders are out there with many challenges. I was a farmer. There's tough days in agriculture when you're as a member or as a farmer. You can go to anybody out there. There's always tough days and people's challenge, and we need to make sure that we have as many supports as we possibly can, Mr. Speaker. Now, the government has saying that they're going to go to, basically it's a call center, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Now, I know there's certainly been helplines, island helplines, there's all kinds of different mental health phone line services, but it's somewhat redundant if you don't have a place for people to go. In the end of the day, when people call and they need help, you know, you got to be able to try to provide that. Just a talk can help in some cases. I'm not saying it doesn't. But if you're somebody that's suicidal, Mr. Speaker, and you're at the other end of the island and you make a phone call, there's going to be challenges in being able to prevent that person from continuing on with that process. And it's not easy. And, you know, I think the call center 24 hours a day, a person at the end of the line is a very positive move, but it's redundant if you don't have the people on the other end to make sure that you can take them to a facility or to get them to attain a service. You know, I've had the opportunity, I've toured the Queen Elizabeth Hospital when people get taken in, you know, that they're at harm to themselves, and they have to have 24-hour care to be monitored and trying to settle people down. Tough situations, difficult. The staff are under tremendous pressure. You know, it makes my heart bleed to see the challenges that those people have to deal with, the problems that Islanders have out there, Mr. Speaker. Now they talk about, you know, a PEI center for well-being. Now we're back from hubs and homes to centers. A PEI center of mental well-being. You know, how's that different from a campus? One time we were talking a campus when we were in government trying to develop a campus. Not a lot of detail to what that actually is, Mr. Speaker. You know, but anyway, we'll say that the wording sounds good, and let's see where it goes. Another line here, it says, health human resources are critical to the delivery of quality health care. I could certainly agree with that, Mr. Speaker. If we don't have the human resources to deliver the service, like I said, it's not a sci-fi movie here where we can do a quick scan and find out what's wrong with people. We have our challenges in making sure that we can find the healthcare staffing to do that. And we're not alone, Mr. Speaker. Every jurisdiction out there, probably around the world, is having troubles with this. So I understand the challenges the government is having. But you got to at least try to hold our own. We've got to tread water. We've got to keep things where we're at. And now government has announced that it was going to, for the dealing with doctors, it's going to hire a doctor to try to find a doctor. And that's wonderful. They got a budget, I think, of $800,000 to try to do that. I'm hopeful there'll be an announcement that they've had some successes, but I want to see gains, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to see that we're just, we always announce the doctors we have come and never announce the doctors that are leaving, and I know of doctors that are leaving here, Mr. Speaker. I look at some of the things that, I know the member for Montague-Kilmuir talked a little bit about wanting dialysis in Montague. Yeah, okay, that's probably a great idea too. Then I'd say I want dialysis in O'Leary. We all have services we want, and they come at fair costs.
We have it in Alberta.
We have it in Alberta. You have it in Surrey. Surrey has dialysis. I have no problem with that. Makes sense. You've got to spread the services out. You've got to have each facility to make sure that it's specialized in certain levels of service. But you have to put it in this perspective. If one community gets something, then the other community, what's the alternative? Or we have to give it to everybody. My constituents may require dialysis services, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to travel too far. No different than the people from Montague to have to travel to Surrey, Mr. Speaker. Or Charlottetown. Yeah. So these are the types of things that I think it's important that government has to always keep in mind when it's trying to deliver services and puts things in the throne speech. I think our rural hospitals play a key role in the delivery of health care. I've always advocated for that. But like I said, they all have to have their niche and their place that they deliver that service, and that we can't do everything in every facility, but we have to, each facility to take its area of expertise so we don't replicate and duplicate things of that nature, Mr. Speaker. But certainly we have to look at our situation, in creating this working group, I think, to look at our training facilities, UPI, nursing school, their LPN programs at Holland College. I think those do good work. I know in my riding we used to have the LPN course at Holland College, offered the class at the Future Tech West building in O'Leary. We had a model hospital rooms. We had the O'Leary Hospital just up the road, and they graduated a number of students. Things were pretty good. Eventually, Holland College didn't do that anymore. Now we're looking at doing more. And I see some programs that look like they have good potential. The 2 and 2, 2 in Holland College, 2 at UPEI. Those are good things. They're going to say that they're going to establish a $5 million fund for the recruitment of nurses for the next 5 years. Well, that's $1 million a year. And although we do, we are looking at developing things for debt forgiveness, incentives for nurses to come and practice here in Prince Edward Island, I can assure you every other jurisdiction does similar things. And if we establish something, they'll probably establish something because they're not going to want to lose nurses any more than we are to try to get them, Mr. Speaker. I caution government in thinking that they're going to gain significantly by doing some of these things. You have to maybe do this in consultation with other jurisdictions. Who are your competitors out there for these nurses and these health professionals, these doctors? I've seen many times we'd have, when I was Minister of Health, we'd have people would sign a return for service agreement that they're coming back to Prince Edward Island to deliver health care services. First thing, when the time comes, all of a sudden another jurisdiction offered them a bit more, and they go to that, and yes, we got our money back because the other jurisdiction would offer the same money to get the student, but we didn't get the worker, we didn't get the student, we didn't get the health professional. So in the end of the day, you have to, it's a way to try to be competitive, but maybe it's a way to try to negotiate with some of your competitors out there to say, how can we all get a share of our nursing graduates, and that we're not all competing against each other to try to accomplish something. We talk about wanting to show respect for our healthcare professionals. We've all probably, as MLAs, gotten our emails from the LPN profession out there, Mr. Speaker, and the reclassification that our LPNs have gone through. Once again, reclassification may have some benefits and merits, but now I'm getting comments that back pay hasn't come as quickly as they had thought it was going to come. We're seeing cases where they have to upgrade more. The benefits or the classification process is going to impact some of our LPNs that have been in the profession for a fairly long time, where new ones will go up faster. Is that fair? Well, I mean, I leave that to the negotiation process. Our negotiations with unions and organizations is important out there. We want to make sure that we're dealing with those contract negotiations fairly and respectfully. But if LPNs are telling me that they're not feeling respected, they're not feeling the love, that tells me that there's concern out there, Mr. Speaker. So I think that's important. Same thing we're dealing with paramedics. Once again, in negotiation. Now, paramedics is not the government. That's the Island EMS that they have the contract with. I'm clarifying that. But the Island EMS does have a contract with government. And in the end of the day, those negotiations haven't been going real smoothly. And that profession is not feeling the love either, Mr. Speaker. So, I caution, once again, when people read the throne speech and we're going to do all these things for these medical health professionals, and then we start to hear the comments that maybe we're not treating the ones that we have had the opportunity to have dealings with as professional and as embracing as we would like to see, Mr. Speaker. In the throne speech we talk about, we're getting to page 9, so we're kind of working our way through it. The seniors' health strategy, embracing existing and new programs. Once again, we deal with our issues when it comes to home care and support. I see they're talking about virtual long-term care and care at home programs. Once again, I understand that many Islanders want to stay at home for as long as they can, but the problem is at some point in time they can't. It just gets to be beyond what the family can bear. I had to deal with my own parents. Tough trying to get through that process. There just simply wasn't the beds there. There simply wasn't the supports there. As much as home care and support did wonderful work, but coming in once a day for maybe a half hour, an hour, doesn't quite solve the problem when you got another 22 to 23 hours that you have to look after a loved one. You've got certainly situations where at certain levels they may only come once a week. Once again, doesn't resolve the problem. And families today aren't as large as they used to be. I know the Premier has a large family, but I didn't. And once again, some of my family have moved away. I have a sister in Ontario, and unfortunately, due to COVID, she wasn't able to get here. That's no fault of government, but I'm just saying it's a challenge that families have. Those are things that and then you have people that have moved here, and their families are somewhere else. They're moved here for the quality of living and their retirement years. And a lot of Islanders have gotten into that category. And once again, they don't have the family supports that are around them. So, it's something that we have to try to look at. How do we expand upon that? And once again, the wording here says that you're going to head in that direction, but we need to know what are the details around that. So when it says the transition from acute care to home, once again, that takes a lot of supports. And, at-home respite program, usually the whole concept of respite was that you got the chance to take your loved one to a long-term care facility, because there's respite beds in every long-term care facility. We would take my mom when my dad would just get burnt out, or even difficulty in my own scheduling, to accommodate, where we would have a week at respite at long-term care in O'Leary. And so I'm a little unsure how you do respite at home. Now, maybe it's you have somebody come in and stay at our home and look after, in that case, my mom or anybody's mom or dad. And but is that workable? Is that doable? That's certainly different than what we have now, anyway. And are people able? Is that once again medically safe? And is it a good way to provide a level of service? Maybe it's a case of more respite beds is required, to allow people to get that level of service. We did have respite care, like say, you know, in my mom and dad's situation, you know, somebody would come in for about an hour, 2 hours, and sort of give my dad a break, and he would go to, you know, a coffee shop or whatever, and did give him a little bit of a break. Now, our family was doing some of that too, but in the end of the day, it still didn't provide that 24-hour continuum of care that was probably required in my mom's case. My government will introduce nurse practitioners to the care teams of private long-term care facilities. Yes, I know that our nurse practitioners do work in our long-term care facilities that are government operated, and I think that sounds like a good initiative. I think our nurse practitioners do wonderful work. I just can't speak highly enough of the ones that we have. A constituent of the member from Albert and Bloomfields is Dawn Riley. Just I hear nothing but great words about her. Kabir Martin in Tyne Valley, and other ones, people just rave about how good it works. I'm sure there's other nurse practitioners all over the island. So once again, I know that has to be something that's negotiated with the Medical Society to allow nurse practitioners and what role they play in that. But I'm sure the minister, I think I added about 30 nurse practitioners to the complement when I was minister, and I'm sure the minister will add more to that. And I think that's a positive thing, and I certainly commend them for that. As we go to page 10, a commitment to our children and families. And, you know, that's something that sounds good, and I really encourage government. One of the big challenges that we have out there is childcare spaces. In my riding, I have 2 facilities, and one in the member of Tyne Valley Sherbrookes that takes in a fair bit of my riding. That would be the Tyne Valley Play School. I also have Chances in O'Leary and the Lennox Island Daycare. And all 3 facilities are early year centers designated. And from what I'm hearing, I have actually had conversations with them all. And I know in O'Leary, they're implementing renovations. They hope that they can add 15 more children. They're going to transfer them from one facility to the next. And the Minister, I'm sure, for Early Learning is aware of these things. And they'd like to add 6 more infants and 5 more preschoolers within 6 months. Now, they have to go through a process to add more facilities to the early year, or more space to the early year centers, in the respect that you have to be up and operational, have a certain amount of designation of space for 6 months before you can transfer that over. Is that not correct? And so that's something that maybe the minister can work on expediting that process a little bit to make it fair for all facilities. And I know Chances and O'Leary do fantastic work. I cannot get over the difference that I see in children today, how much more advanced they are. I see my granddaughter goes to the Tyne Valley Play School, and you know, I'm amazed when I see her come home at 4 years of age to what I can recall my daughters coming home at 4 years of age. It's a great process. I commend government to continue on that path, but the adding of 300 more spaces is certainly lofty, but it would sound, in my riding anyway, it sounds like we can add spaces fairly easily and probably meet the needs. So I would certainly encourage the minister to work with Chances in O'Leary and try to get that to happen. Now, the Tyne Valley Play School, I'm sure the MLA for the area is well aware of the situation there, not as easy to deal with. They're limited in space. They're limited in the space of their lot. Now we've got a problem. You know, how are we going to find more spaces for that particular facility? And you know, now once again, Lennox Island, it's just gone through an expansion, and it's hoping that it's going to be able to meet the demands and needs very easily. But it's one big challenge, and all 3 of them have mentioned this, is staffing. Can't find the people. Can't add the kids with spaces if we can't find the people to run them. Same issue we're running to long-term care, Mr. Speaker. You have to have the human resources to do that. And that's going to be a challenge for, you know, the minister. And how are you going to deal with this? You got payroll issues, the value per hour, the jobs, all of that's going to be the challenge for them. Don't have a lot of time. I wish the minister Godspeed in the issue, you know, as far as that goes. But I did want to give the minister at least an update of the situation in my own riding, that Chances in O'Leary, we're ready to roll if we can find the people. Lennox Island, the same. But we do have a problem. But I'll leave that to the member for Tyne Valley Sherbrooke to work on the Tyne Valley Play School problem. I'm sure you have been already. So, you know, with that, we hope that that issue will be resolved. and get those, at least our portion of those spaces, because like I say, every space is full. Can't find anybody. My daughter, when she was trying to find a space for, just even after she got with child, you know, she started putting her name around all the facilities in our area. And luckily enough, she did get a space eventually, but baby was born and pretty near a year old before a space became available. So, you know, grandparents are going to do what they could to try to fill that void. But if you don't have the spaces, you can't get the value, you can't get the good benefits that it has, and it has to be consistent, Mr. Speaker. That level of service, of education that we're providing our preschoolers has to be consistent across the province. I want my children, or my grandchildren, and the children in my riding to get the same curriculum. I want to get the same level of service in Larry, Lennox Island, or Tyne Valley as they do in Charlotte, Summerside, or Montague. And whether it's private or public. So that's going to be a challenge for the minister. I commend you in trying to do what you can on it. I'm there to help you in my district, and will support you on anything that works towards this. But failure is not an option. It's got to be ready to go for September. Once again, if the document says it's going to be, it's got to be. That's what our job is here to do. Now, I talked a little bit about, now we're into an area that I have a little more expertise in, Mr. Speaker. I'm not saying I'm an expert in childcare. Raised 2 daughters, and I guess they did pretty good. But the other one is a comment. We want to ensure our high school and post-secondary students are better supported and prepared for employment opportunity success upon leaving school. I've probably committed a lot of my life to trying to do that same achievement, Mr. Speaker. I was an employment counselor for 13 years in my riding, and for some of that time I was a youth employment counselor. And I'm not sure the challenges within the education system, but unfortunately there are people that come through the education system, graduate with a grade 12, and for whatever reasons don't seem to have the skill sets to compete in the workplace, to get the jobs that maybe sustain their families, their lives as they move forward, Mr. Speaker. Now, in my riding, I commend we have some great staff that are out there that work towards this. We have career development services in O'Leary, Mr. Speaker. I know there's locations all across the province that career development services does. You know, I think of Jackie Lidston Stewart, and I think of Dean Getson. They provide opportunities for people. You want to come in and sit down and try to think about a career option, they'll work with you. There's programs out there, and they'll guide you through the process, Mr. Speaker. You could even go across the hall. You can go over to Skills PEI, the Minister of Economic Development and Tourism, and these other whatever parts of his portfolio are there, but they do good work. There's some great staff in there. They'll help people through. They have a lot of programs. They do get the programs out quickly. I commend the minister. He's great when I talk to him about some of these issues, and the turnaround's good. And he does request feedback from the MLA, and I appreciate that, Minister. Where's a good spot to do a work-study hub? Well, we got one that's up and it's running. We worked out all the details to make it happen. I commend the minister for that. Skills PEI, like I say, the people that are in there, I think Elisa Bernard and Mary McDonald and Cora Shea, you know, those are people that do great work, and they'll help anybody through making sure that transition out of the school system, come in there, and they'll try to help you with what programs. There's a multitude of wage subsidy programs, apprenticeship programs. I certainly encourage people to go after those programs. They're there for you, and there's good people to give you good advice. Services Canada, just up the road again, Mr. Speaker, my ride in O'Leary and Inverness. Same thing, there's some staff there, Karen Malone and Laurie Wallace and people like that. And they do good work in providing the federal programs and making sure people. Now, unfortunately, the pandemic has created major problems for both Skills PEI and Career Development Services and Service Canada. Hard to get an appointment to get in and see anybody. It's all has to be over the phone, online, and I shudder to think when I think back now when this pandemic first occurred, the amount of phone calls I got. Where do I go? Who do I see? I can't get through to anybody. Those are things that are critical, and people need that human contact. And I think we're getting to a point. This pandemic hopefully is starting to. We'll see light by fall, and hopefully these people in offices will get open to the public and we can get going here. I want to talk about a couple of other organizations out there that do good work, is Community Inclusions, an organization I used to work for myself, Mr. Speaker, as an employment counselor that works with intellectually disabled adults. And it does the same thing, Mr. Speaker. It's trying to transition those people from that have intellectual challenges from grade 12 through into the workforce. There's an employment counselor that's hired to do that. And it was my responsibility to try to find the work placements, work with the family, identify the challenges that were had, whether that's transportation, it's usually a problem in most cases. A lot of people with intellectual disabilities aren't able to get a driver's license or have the resources to purchase a car or vehicle. Some do, but it was also to make sure that it was a job that is something that the person liked to do and wanted to do and could get there. You know, I think of Natalie Horn-Gallant in O'Leary, constituent of mine from the Lock Road, Mr. Speaker, and she does a fabulous job of trying to help people integrate into the workforce in that group. Another group I want to commend is Career Bridges, Mr. Speaker. Career Bridges across the island, but O'Leary in particular, there's a lady there called Nancy Bell, and or Nancy Bell. That was her maiden name. Hamill was her last name. Constituent of Albert and Bloomfield. And Mary Lou Rogers, fabulous person. The work that they do in trying to help people deal with the drama in their lives, deal with the impediments that are the difficulties for them being successful in employment should they get it, and to help them maybe do some career exploration to find out what's the job, what's the career, what's the thing that motivates that person the most. What's something that they could succeed at? What's something that, what training do they need to get to that? Understanding their personality, understanding the impediments that's preventing them from being successful, Mr. Speaker. That organization does fabulous work. I cannot commend them enough. From time to time, they invite me to their closings. I enjoy that immensely. I know the member from Albert and Bloomfield, the member from Evangeline Muscush, and others have come to those closings at times too. And when some of these people share their story of where they were and the successes that they had, it's heartwarming, and it just sort of makes you feel good all over that as a MLA and as a government, whether in opposition or otherwise, that we advocate and encourage for that organization to make sure that they get the funding to do the work that they need to do. Some of the challenges that they have, Mr. Speaker, is getting people to accept the program and take the chance in life to make sure that we're providing these people the incentives to take the courses. It's a big issue. Some of them, they have child care support issues. They still have to put bread on the table, as they say, and there are allowances. You know, I'm not saying there's nothing, but it does become a challenge for many to be an incentive. Something I've said in our government when we were in power, and I'll say to this government, if a person wants to take the course 2 or 3 times, by all means, you know, let's if they weren't successful the first time, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 cracks at a issue. You know, and I think, you know, when we work with our public school system, our secondary institutions, our community, and our industry, we'll have a greater awareness. These are words that's in the throne speech. But, you know, I think when we talk about school to the workforce, you know, one time we had guidance counselors in all our schools that did that work. That was part of their response. When I was in school, that was kind of if I thought about it, I wanted to be a veterinarian, they'd give me all the resources that I had to where I can get the course, what it costs, all those kinds of. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, many of our guidance counselors are tied up with many personal dramas and challenges that some of our students have, and they don't have the ability and the time to maybe do some of this work. So I would certainly hope that we can create that good transition team that will come and how do we deal with all of this. That's important. But I will also say that, you know, the province has a labour market development agreement with the federal government. It takes the resources from the federal government and distributes them out as it sees fit for each particular province. So, you know, I know they're doing a pretty good job of that, Mr. Speaker. I certainly have little to criticize in that regard. Minister seems to be on top of the portfolio in that regard. So, you know, when I talk about some things of science fairs, heritage fairs, clean tech science fairs, all well and good. I've My daughters actually excelled in both of those. My oldest daughter wound up winning the Heritage Fair in Charlottetown here, and wound up going to Kamloops, BC, to represent Prince Edward Island in the, I think it was the Canadian Heritage Fair in Kamloops, British Columbia. And that was her first time away from home. She learned so much from that. The biggest thing I always sort of say that they learn from these presentations and fairs, how to communicate. It's somewhat irrelevant to the science project or the heritage project, but if they can learn how to communicate, answer questions, and debate with a judge and adjudicator on their project, that's where they learn the most. Now, my second daughter, who was a big science, well, I guess I kind of, maybe as a parent, you kind of push your kids sometimes, but I was a big advocate for, back when I was an employment counselor, to make sure that we had our science fairs in all our schools. And that's something not every school has science fairs. It should be almost mandatory that they have science fairs, Mr. Speaker. But I remember saying to my daughter in grade 4 is when they first started the science fair, you gotta get a project. She found a partner, and I'll say Dad did push her a little bit and tried to guide her a little bit where to go, but she did pretty good at it. I don't think she won, probably got him second or third or something, but she did okay. But that encouraged her. The next year, grade 3, back again, and eventually in grade 12, she won the science at the UPI science fair for the province. She wound up winning for West Isle. Now West Isle didn't even have a science fair, and she said, "Dad, I want to represent my school." I said, "Well, just go talk to the principal. If they're not going to have a science fair for you to compete in, say you'd like to represent the school." Now West Isle has a robotics class, and it kind of is the de facto representative of the West Isle School. But in this case, they were allowed to send my daughter Sarah and the robotics class. Sarah wound up winning. Now that particular year, the National Science Fair was in Truro, Nova Scotia. So she was a bit bummed out that she only got to go to Truro, and my other daughter got to go to Kamloops, BC. But anyway, but still, well, it's the distance. I don't want to diminish the people of Truro and that it's not as an exotic a place, but if you come from Freeland, it's probably not as exotic as Kamloops, BC would have been, Mr. Speaker. So from that perspective, but my daughter, she did go on. She got her PhD I should say she got her undergraduate degree in biochemistry at UPEI and went on to get her PhD in biochemistry at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. And, well, I guess everybody knows the history that I had to go to her wedding in Germany, but she now lives in Germany, in Aachen, Germany. Now, nobody heard that. But anyway, and for the green hacks that are out there, they'll be piling all on me again. But anyway, that's okay. I keep saying some days you have to make dad decisions versus professional decisions. And as long as you're not breaking any laws, Mr. Speaker, I had to comment on that. I said sometimes if I was trying to break her out of prison or something, if it was my daughter, that probably would be against the law. We wouldn't do that. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'm just saying I think that the point I'm trying to make is science fairs and heritage fairs do make a difference in people's lives. They do allow our students to experience wonderful things, and they learn to communicate and debate and challenge. And that's what we need our minds to do. So I certainly commend the government, if this Clean Tech Science Fair is going to be part of the national or the provincial science fairs. That's a good thing. But I really encourage the Minister of Education to make sure that she makes sure every school participates. That's the key. As we go on, Mr. Speaker, investing in clean technology, it says our leadership in wind energy has been forged. And I know that the member from Tignish Palmer Road, it talks a lot about that the Wind Energy Institute for Prince Edward Island is the Canadian Wind Energy Institute is up in North Cape, Mr. Speaker. They do fantastic work up there. Scott Harper and his staff doing research on the most effective wind energy systems. In my riding, Mr. Speaker, I have the largest wind farm in Prince Edward Island, the West Cape Wind Farm. I believe 55 windmills at that location. And, they, once again, the staff there do great work. Robbie Thibodeau, I get to see them I haven't seen anybody in a year, but usually I'm in there once or twice a year to see how things are going. But that also comes, and I had a chance to talk to the new Minister of Infrastructure when it comes to, I'm still dealing with the Howland Road power line issue, but the Minister does assure me that he will meet with that group at some point in time, and we'll look at options that we can to try to mediate that particular situation. When it comes to our, our PEI clean tech sector, I would hope our Wind Institute in North Cape is going to play a key role in that. They've already done a lot of the research. The science is there. I think they have the expertise and technology to support any island company. So I would hope that any agreements that are made, that they are part of that. We talked a little bit about we've already seen 13,000 new heat pumps. I guess I would be one of those islanders that has converted over to a heat pump. So in my particular case, I've kind of 3 energy sources in my home, and none of it is oil-based, Mr. Speaker. So I've got rid of my oil tank. I'm finding my heat bill, my cost of heating my home has gone down. A little more harder work maybe because I have to burn more wood. But a heat pump seems to do a really good job of heating a home, especially in the months that aren't quite as cold as what we have today. I tried to run my heat pump up to about, I think we ran it this year to about the 1st of December, switched over to wood. And my goal is sometime in March to hopefully go back to the heat pump and stop the wood. And I go to the woods a fair bit when I can, Mr. Speaker, and I like to cut wood and manage my forestry on my property, and also work towards clearing some land and try to do some things with my property, Mr. Speaker. So I would encourage government to more incentives for heat pumps, because I think one of the things that you do look at, because there is a cost to that transition, when you look at people that may be low-income islanders that are on an oil-based heating source, home heating oil, there is some costs and there's some work that has to be done to convert that over. Not everybody has a wood lot, so that's a factor in things, but I would encourage government to make sure you can do whatever you can to incentivize people to do those transitions. And although we have some now, I still wonder if it's enough to do more of that, because I do think the heat pump technology seems to have advanced to the point where it can heat a home, and if our homes are better insulated and some of those things, you can get further along. And if you can so in my third source I have is I put a couple of electric rads. I put in my bathroom and in my kitchen, I put electric rad in there. And for the main reason for that was just if we didn't get home in time or something like that, and it was too cold for the heat pump, at least the electric rads would kick in and we wouldn't run into a issue around freeze up in the home. Now, one of the biggest things that I picked off from the throne speech that I have concerns about, I'll say once again, it depends on which way it goes on this, but it says there's a $50 million to assist new business in existing technology in adopting new and clean technological solutions. And the strategy will also establish 3 tax-free development zones. Now, I will say that, in the previous Binns government, that was one of the issues that they do. They would have these tax-free zones. And what we've seen up in my riding or in my area is they made Bloomfield one of these tax-free zones. Well, what did happen? All of a sudden, everybody wanted to go to Bloomfield. Everybody left O'Leary and Alberton. But O'Leary was left with the issue of trying to deliver services. It had sewer systems, it had rinks, it had legions, it had all these things. And where was all the businesses going? Out to Bloomfield. Now, if the 3 development zones are Prince, Queens, and Kings County, okay, I'll go along with that. But when you start picking winners and losers, then you're going to get into political trouble. I can guarantee that. I've talked to the mayors of O'Leary. What do you think of this? Well, we don't know. Now, if O'Leary's in one of those tax-free zones, I guess that would be positive. But I wouldn't want to be Alberton or Tyne Valley if that be the case, So it's something that we have to be concerned about. I'm going to be watching what these tax-free zones look like. I would suggest, Mr. Speaker, to anybody in the House here, let's make it, anybody that comes up with a clean technology business solution, okay, you're going to be tax-free on your property that you're doing that work on. That's fair to everybody. If you're out in West Cape and you're connected to the wind farm and you want to do some clean technology and your business is already out there, why would you make you move? Makes no sense. And like I say, I caution that when you pick winners and losers politically, it can be difficult. And as opposition, if it affects my riding, if I'm starting to see businesses going to another riding because, it's a tax-free zone, I'm not too happy with that. So, and I'll voice my displeasure on that. I'll represent the people of my riding and the businesses of my riding that they want a fair access to the tax development zones that anybody else is getting, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not saying that Bloomfield is going to be it, because 3 zones, I'm not sure where they're going. There's not enough detail here, but I'm raising awarenesses. That's my role and why I'm speaking to the throne speech here, Mr. Speaker. So I hope I can say in my 14 years I can maybe give advice to government. Don't follow the mistakes of the past. Try to learn from it. Try to learn from it. That's all we can do. When we made them, I've made them too. No, well, I'll do it. Well, I'll do it. But it's my goal to make sure that they don't. So the second initiative is establish a PEI Energy Academy Eco Innovation Park. Once again, where's that? Is it going to be in West Cape? All for it. Maybe it's going to be in North Cape where there's a wind institute up there. Maybe it's going to be in Mount Pleasant. Maybe Mount Pleasant. There's a large parcel of land that's owned there by the province, a PEI. That's in my district. Be happy with that. But I'm kind of guessing it might not be. So anyway, so if any of those locations aren't where it's going to be at, then and how does that look? So we'll wait and see how that evolves here, because it did say in the speech it's more evolutionary than revolutionary. But anyway, so those are a few things that I kind of picked up. Now we can skip on to 15 here. The microloan program for represented populations will provide islanders. I think a microloan program is a great idea. It should be for everybody, Mr. Speaker. But maybe there's greater risks you take with people that have, issues, whether it's Indigenous people, BIPOC, women, there's things that you've got to take in any lending. I don't think you just give money out to anybody. There has to be some process to determine the viability of a business initiative and idea. And once again, it will allow all islanders the chance to create their own business. Let's tap into as many business opportunities as we can out there for people, Mr. Speaker. And as we continue on here, my government certainly talks about continuing to strengthen its relationship to First Nations. And, a treaty right fishery is something that's been discussed in this legislature. But I think it's very important that that's really something that's negotiated between DFO and DFO will work with the Indigenous groups in the province to make sure that conservation is paramount for all islanders and for the resource, Mr. Speaker. So there's certainly lots of work that needs to be done on that particular issue. And in general terms, we've talked about our motions here, and I think they got rather misinterpreted maybe in the fishing community. I know, I'm not sure if I'd want to be a Green candidate going to some fishermen's houses in my community, but that's okay. But anyway, having said that, I got my earful too, by the way. It wasn't just them. but anyhow, but it has to be more than just. I know that the Premier went up to Lennox Island and promised them pavement. And we did get some pavement. There was 0.9 kilometers of pavement done on Opus Trail. I appreciate that. I thank the Premier for that, and I thank the Minister for backing that up, because there was a little bit of dispute whether that pavement was showing or not. But
honourable members, the hour has been called.
Thank you, Mr.
The honourable member from Morel, Dona.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't wait for another hour of that tomorrow. It's going to be exciting. I move, seconded by the member from Montague Kilmere, that this House do adjourn until March 4th at 1 o'clock in the PM.
Shall I carry?
Carry. What's that? Makes me feel like I got the wrong.